Chapter 181. Lacroix felt that the war had changed its nature. Or rather, this was what war truly was, and what had passed were just minor skirmishes. He was born into a wandering survivor tribe, where staying meant struggling to survive, so under the lead of a senior, he and a dozen other youths left the tribe and followed a merchant to Rubbish Town, where they joined an adventure group. To call it an adventure group was actually a stretch. They were armed garbage collectors. After getting a dozen guns on credit from the merchant, they began their scavenging life. Not daring to venture too far, they scavenged in the safe zones just outside Rubbish Town, looking for metal scraps and picking up radiant stones to make it through the day. They'd then trade their haul for food back in town. Their daily earnings went to buying food and paying off a bit of their firearm loans, leaving nothing left over. And if they ever encountered a fight, like with the mutated monsters occasionally found in the city ruins, they had to be conservative with their ammo since bullets were expensive. That period of his life was devoid of hope, of a future. But he didn't find it particularly sad. Having food to eat was good enough. For a long time in the past, he didn't even know what it felt like to be full. He and his companions spent 2 years drifting through Rubbish Town. Just when he thought he'd end up scraping by for the rest of his life until he could no longer work, he encountered the Greenskins. Out of the several companions from his hometown, only 6 survived. The rest, including the senior who had led them out, were all killed by the Greenskins. If it had been just casualties, that would have been one thing, but the way his companions died was too horrific. The Greenskins devoured and skinned people alive in front of them, cracking open skulls to eat the brains. He wanted to retrieve the bodies but didn't dare, so he was pulled back by others as they fled. Among the survivors, some completely gave up the life of scavengers and adventurers because of that incident. But he and 2 other brothers could never forget that scene. After hearing about the beast slaughter group, they joined it. It was shameful to admit that even though they joined with the intent to take revenge on the Greenskins, after 4 months in the group, only he survived, and he had personally killed only 1 Greenskin. When they went looking for trouble with the Greenskins, they could only try to find very small targets, no more than 2 or 3 together. But even then, they needed to assemble a force of 30 to 50 people before they dared to make a move. Using iron pipe rifles when exchanging fire with those Greenskins offered no advantage. They had roughly the same range but far less power, and humans unlike the Greenskins couldn't endure many bullets. So, people in the beast slaughter group had to think of other methods. They modified their firearms, increased the caliber, and added more powder. Although this severely decreased the reliability of their guns, it definitely increased the power of the bullets. They equipped themselves with large knives and long spears, so when the Greenskins got close, they had handy weapons to fight back. In the time it took for 1 Greenskin to rip through 3 or 4 people, 6 or 7 spears could be plunged into its body. Everyone said that the beast slaughter group had special methods for fighting the Greenskins, but to Lacroix, what special methods were there? It was nothing but stronger courage, a deep-rooted hatred, and a reckless willingness to outnumber and sacrifice many lives just to kill 2 or 3 Greenskins. It was just like that. But now, it was different. Earlier, when the leader asked if he wanted to accept reorganization, he thought it was simple: better treatment than before, better equipment, and still able to fight the Greenskins. What's not to like? But what he didn't expect was that after accepting the reorganization, the entire way of waging war had changed. After resting in the barracks for a few days and undergoing a round of training under the governor's watchful eyes, he felt like he suddenly understood a lot more. Shooting posture, military skills, constructing fortifications, squad coordination, armored support, artillery support. Those days were miraculous. His mind suddenly cleared up, and he immediately understood any principle he was told, and any skill he practiced. Arriving at the front again, he was led by the team. Now it was the squad leader. Under the squad leader's command, their 10-man group constructed 2 fire points. They were made from the common rubble and broken bricks of the ruins, located on a small slope to create a high ground firing position. And such fire points were scattered at intervals, built by other comrades in the same company, ensuring crossfire could be exchanged between points and providing smooth mutual support. This knowledge was newly acquired. Before, they could only rely on experience and guesswork, lacking such efficient construction of positions. And these positions soon proved their worth. A group of about a dozen Greenskins, taking advantage of the night, stealthily approached, and they were already near one of the fortifications when the sentry spotted them. The sounds of gunfire woke everyone, and the few soldiers stationed there began resisting fiercely. Brothers from the neighboring point who could provide fire support also immediately opened fire. The machine guns and rifles blended into a chorus of shots. 2 or 3 greenskins were killed on the spot by the dense gunfire. The small group then retreated while firing, losing 3 people, allowing the greenskins to conquer the position, but then, reinforcements came, launching 2 rockets into it. After firing, 7 or 8 men charged in together, bayonets fitted, and started fighting the remaining greenskins hand to hand. Chapter 182. Lacroix was one of them. He had even personally stabbed one to death. In close combat, humans were naturally at a disadvantage, even though many of the greenskin orcs were wounded or killed by the blasts. The remaining 4 still managed to slay 7 soldiers. But overall, the exchange ratio between the two sides was only 1-to-1. In the past, these dozen greenskin orcs would have been enough to wipe out their entire platoon. However, the battle was far from over at this point. Their position had been thrown into disarray, and it seemed like the greenskin orcs seized this opportunity, sending in more troops to launch an assault on them. Tonight was moonless, but with the help of the searchlight illumination from the position, Lacroix could clearly see at least 50 greenskin orcs forming layers of dark shadows, charging toward their piece of the battlefield. At that moment, he was extremely tense, frantically opening fire along with his comrades. It seemed like everyone knew there was no way out. There was no escape, they couldn't outrun these greenskin orcs. At this moment, their only thought was to take at least one enemy with them before dying. And just then, a whistling sound came from above their heads. Lacroix remembered that before coming to reinforce, the platoon leader had said that as soon as the fight broke out here, the company commander would send a telegram to the rear joint artillery regiment. If they held on, they could get artillery support. And here it came. At least 3 artillery shells landed in front of them. The huge explosions almost deafened him. But Lacroix was inexplicably excited. This is what fighting in a war was like. The orcs had thick hides and flesh, but they were still made of flesh and blood. Under the power of the 155 mm howitzer, those within a radius of 5 or 6 meters from the explosion were obliterated. Within 50 meters, the shock wave and the dense shrapnel were lethal enough to kill. The 3 shells hit their mark precisely. If the greenskin orcs hadn't been so spread out and had known to lie down and hide when the shells were coming, those 3 shells would have been enough to kill them all. But even so, at least 20 greenskin orcs were finished. The rest, howling, got up and continued to charge up the slope. But by then, more of the surrounding firepower points had reacted, opening fire frenziedly on this position, with at least 10 machine guns targeting here, and countless rifles as well. The G9M light machine guns, paired with the G9A automatic rifles, formed a fire network that was many times more powerful than the old iron-barreled rifles they had used before. Under the dense fire of the network, the greenskin orcs eventually all fell on their way to the charge. After that, the entire night and the entire defense line seemed to come alive as if battles were raging everywhere. The sound of gunfire was faintly heard from as far as 10 kilometers away, and the constant roar of artillery never ceased. Lacroix and his men also suffered several attacks after that. They too sustained many casualties, especially when those greenskin orcs got within 30 to 50 meters, as the enemy's crude firearms could ensure the death of one of their own with a hit. But when has there ever been a battle without casualties? Tonight, what Lacroix could assure was that at least on his stretch of the front, more greenskin orcs died than his own men did. After dawn, the greenskin orcs' offensive stopped. After tallying losses and counting the enemy dead, there were over 50 greenskin orc corpses in front of them. 30 to 40 of them had been killed by artillery and rocket launchers, about 10 had been shot, and 5 or 6 had been bayoneted to death after charging into close combat. On Lacroix's side, they had lost 30 warriors. A new platoon, carrying their breakfast, took over their position at 10 o'clock in the morning. Lacroix and his comrades, after fighting all night and losing 30% of their combat strength, were allowed to retreat and rest for a while. He himself didn't even feel tired, his heart was actually filled with excitement, and he even wanted to fight another battle. Rostax felt exhausted and incredibly irritated, yet he still wanted to fight another battle. Fighting, killing, and seeing blood splatter. These were the biggest hobbies of the greenskin orcs, ingrained in their genes as a natural instinct. They were savage, ferocious, battle-driven by nature, fearless of death. The one thing they feared the most was not having a fight, and losing a battle would also put them in a foul mood. Today was one of those not-so-happy days. To avoid losing, Rostax could only temporarily order his boys to withdraw. A few mad surgeons were performing surgeries on green-skin youths with severed hands, feet, and heads. If a hand was missing, they'd chop one off another greenskin and sew it on, the same with feet. Some of those hit by the cannons were missing quite a few parts, but as long as the head was still there and they weren't dead, they'd just cut the head off and transplant it onto another body with a more intact physique but a ruined head. Rostax watched his boys being put back together again and felt a little bit better. I like to fight, I ain't afraid to die, but that don't mean I don't know when a fight can't be won. Living is for fighting another day. Too many greenskin boys dying makes it bad for future battles. He returned to the makeshift barracks built from the rubble, grabbed a red, crudely made communicator with no apparent system, and fiddled with it to contact the boss at the rear. However, the communicator crackled with electric noise but failed to connect. Rostax grew angrier. He yelled out, "Karcha! Karcha! Get in here!" A guy who looked much skinnier than him, but actually was stronger than the average greenskin orc, came in holding a wrench. "Boss Rostax, what do you need me for? Fix this thing for me. I need to talk to Boss Rib Flesh. It's broken again." Karcha took the communicator from Rostax's hand, scratched his head, then tapped it a few times with a small hammer, and dismantled some parts with the wrench. Then, he handed the communicator back to Rostax. "I reckon it should be good now." Rostax didn't care much, he fiddled with it again and, indeed, it connected. He gave Karcha a kick in the butt, sending the wrench boy on his way. Once he heard familiar panting from the other end, Rostax couldn't wait to shout, "Boss Rib Flesh! I listened to you and led the boys in a charge during their shift change. We lost a whole lot of lads, and we still didn't break through. Those shrimps cannons are too fierce. I want big booms. I want trucks. I want speed bikes." "No." Boss Rib Flesh refused, "You just hold there. Any boy who wants to fight should go fight. The elders say to wait a bit longer, and we can have a big thing, a big boom. We can't reveal it yet. Once we get new boys and new squigs grown, we'll take these big booms and wipe out all those shrimps in one go." "All right, you're the boss, I'll listen to you," Rostax spoke grudgingly, "but you gotta promise me, when it's time, you'll give me extra big booms. You'll get them, you'll get them." With a smack, the communication was cut, and the big boss of the Iron Tooth clan, Rib Flesh, with heavy steps, went to find the elder. He was an old orc, with teeth nearly all fallen out. Among the greenskins, elders were rare. An orc that couldn't fight wouldn't live very long, for greenskins had no tradition of respecting the elderly or caring for the young. But on the other hand, if a greenskin managed to survive to old age but still held a position of great importance within the clan, it meant they must have something special about them and were definitely not as feeble as they appeared. In the presence of the elder, even Boss Rib Flesh, the leader of the entire clan, maintained some respect, an arduous task for a greenskin. "When will our big booms be ready?" Rib Flesh asked. "The boys keep asking and demanding support. If not, I can only have them pull back. Some new shrimps have arrived, and they're giving the boys a real beating." After a moment's thought, the elder said, "We still need to fight, more deaths, more Wadaik, more new boys, even more deaths, even more Wadaik, even more new boys, and more deaths, and then we'll win. We all can become bigger orcs. The boys at the front need to push harder. If not, send more squigs up there. We've got too many of those squigs. We don't need that many. The new mushrooms are growing well, but we still need more land to grow even more mushrooms." Chapter 183. "I don't want to hear so much reasoning, I just want to know when you can finish making the big thing." Tearing Flesh growled, growing somewhat impatient. The elder grabbed Tearing Flesh's hand, "If you want to see those big guys, come with me, I'll show you." Following the elder, Tearing Flesh arrived at an factory. This was an open-air site, with lots of wrench kids working here, kicking their pixie assistants' butts, laughing loudly, and occasionally brawling with each other. Sometimes a greenskin was even killed on the spot. But this didn't affect their work efficiency, and the scene was bustling with fervent activity. And here, Tearing Flesh saw a lot of good stuff. There were greenskin trucks being assembled that looked like a pile of junk casually put together into a semblance of a truck, with multi-barrel autocannons awkwardly stuffed on top, both capable of transporting the boys to the front lines and acting as a fiercely firing armed transport. He also saw what looked like cannons made out of iron drums. 2 or 3 iron drums were simply bound together with wire, and fitting them with a couple of wheels was considered a completed job. Besides these, he also saw several roughly 3-meter-tall tin cans with arms and legs painted with a crude and laughable orc face in white paint. He turned his head, and the elder was watching him. This is a gift prepared for the strongest boss in the clan. Once it's done, if you put it on, with the clickety-clack of chainsaws, the boom of artillery, and the rat-tat-tat of rotary guns, you'll surely be able to kill those shrimps to the last one. Tearing Flesh couldn't help but caress the big fellow, and, finding a pixie worker in the way, kicked it a few meters away with disgust. It was quite a while before he cracked a wide grin and laughed delightedly, "Ha ha ha ha! I want this big guy! When can I wear it?" Don't worry, soon, very soon." 1 month had passed. Gu Hang didn't stay in Rubbish Town all the time, flying back to Revival City several times in between. After all, the Twin City area of Revival City and Wixing City is the foundation. He inspected the reconstruction of Revival City. The outer city area, which had been devastated, was now beginning to take shape. Although it was still a big construction site, according to Ozania's planning, the city area was starting to look like something. The population still active in the outer city was about 600,000, nearly 200,000 of whom were engaged in the city's reconstruction. With the efforts of nearly 200,000 construction workers, the city was being rapidly rebuilt. Now, the total population of Revival City was around 800,000. Of the nearly 900,000 people who used to live outside Revival City, 200,000 moved to Wixing City and another 100,000 to the inner city. The entire city's population structure and industrial structure would become more rational in the following time. But Gu Hang was more concerned about the situation in Wixing City. His main industrial area was here. The population in Wixing City had exceeded 300,000 after receiving a large number of people who had migrated from Revival City and from other settlements within a 200-kilometer radius to the east. The military industry was particularly important. Under the round-the-clock work of the Black Box within the Research Institute and through Wu Jiarong's efforts, various military industrial production capacities were rapidly increasing. In the last month, the military industry in the Waste Hole area produced 55 armored fighting vehicles, 40,000 sets of individual soldier equipment with the G9 rifle as the core, 100 various types of artillery, 40,000 rounds of various types of ammunition, 200 military trucks. The equipment for the Wind Extinguishing Brigade wasn't fully produced yet, but at least 2 more heavy composite camps were ready and would be sent to the front lines. Along with the 1st Wind Extinguishing Brigade's 2nd and 3rd Battalions heading to the front line were also logistics supplies carried by those 200 trucks, along with numerous ammunition and weapons. 200 trucks couldn't carry all this in one trip, it would take several trips. And once this batch of equipment and logistics supplies were in place, the 4 garrison divisions from 4-7 could be fully reorganized. Of course, Gu Hang still had to spend more than 400 points of grace to train them. With training complete and equipment in place, their combat power wouldn't be far behind the 2nd Infantry Division, except for the insufficient number of artillery pieces. Besides military construction, Gu Hang's grace points had surged again in this month. It had nothing to do with the war. Although there was a big war going on outside Rubbish Town, and it was the biggest war since Gu Hang arrived on Rage Owl Star, so far, there has never been a combat settlement interface. Obviously, the previous battles, whether they were counter-push frontline or defensive battles, the many individual fights weren't counted as concluded. If you wanted to see the combat settlement interface, you would probably have to wait until the entire campaign was over. But not having the grace points from battles wasn't a big issue, as his monthly grace point income had risen from less than 400 last month to 588 points now. This spike in monthly income wasn't due to the surge in population, but a genuine increase in productivity. The biggest increase came from Wixing City, where nearly 200,000 more people moved in. With short-term concentrated training and on-the-job training, most of the people solved the unemployment problem. Most importantly, heavy industry and military industry received manpower supplements. Chapter 184. The significant increase in productivity brought about an income rise of over 150 grace points. In terms of Revival City, the construction speed of the outer city was fast, and with the recovery of various industries, the rise in management ability, and the elimination of debuffs, the situation in Revival City kept improving. Although 200,000 people had moved out, the grace points provided by Revival City each month did not decrease but instead increased by 30 points. This monthly income, after accounting for the 400 points spent on training soldiers, along with the expenses for activating tithe, and the training costs for the Wind Extinguishing Brigade and the 2nd Division, left Gu Heng with only 300 grace points remaining, which then again rose back to 890. Gu Heng wouldn't squander these grace points carelessly. The war against the Greenskin tribe he now faced was the largest scale battle he had encountered since his arrival at Rage Owl Star. These Greenskins turned out to be much more troublesome than imagined. Over the course of this month, the soldiers under Gu Heng had suffered a total casualty loss of around 4,000. On a 60-kilometer front line, an average of more than 130 died each day. The number of Greenskins killed was also around 80 or so. The combat loss ratio was 1:1.6, slightly unsightly. The main reason was that, recently, the Greenskins had acquired some new things: artillery and armed pickups. Both of these put great pressure on the front lines. The former directly attacked with firepower. Now, the infantry holding the line occasionally suffered attacks from heavy firepower. The artillery of the Greenskins was potent, and a direct hit meant even fortified positions couldn't withstand it. And the latter was also troublesome. The armor plates on those armed pickups were rough but indeed quite tough, and they could speed along quickly. Belching clouds of black smoke from their rears, the multiple machine guns on top fired fiercely. Without discussing accuracy, they could carry 4 or 5 Greenskins close to the positions. Usually, a couple of rockets would be enough to damage the vehicle, but not necessarily kill all the Greenskins aboard. Just getting troops face-to-face was enough. Consequently, the face-to-face Greenskins would bring no small number of casualties to the soldiers on the defense line. But if it were just that, the problem wouldn't be too big. The soldiers under the governor's command had not retreated a bit on the front line. The artillery of the Greenskins was powerful, but clearly, its range was not as far as that of human cannons. After determining the position of the enemy artillery from their trajectory, the 155mm howitzer positions would often fire 3 or 4 rounds of artillery barrages toward that area. After the bombardment, although it was difficult to confirm the results, the Greenskins' artillery usually fell silent, likely having been swept clean. As for those newly emerged armed pickups, they could only be dealt with by tubes, by landmines laid by scouts, obstacles, and the like, to block them. They would try to delay their advance as much as possible and then destroy them with fire. If they managed to transport the Greenskin infantry up front, then it would come down to a melee, but casualties would be high. The emergence of heavy firepower and armored strength in the enemy was very bad news. Gu Heng himself was already feeling that something was not quite right. After he inspected the military production line in Wuxing City and returned to the rubbish town front line, the 5 interstellar warriors who had arrived by vehicle 2 days earlier immediately sought him out, issuing a warning. Gu Heng had previously extended an invitation to the Phoenix Battle Group, hoping they would help solve the Greenskin problem outside Rubbish Town. The Greenskins were old adversaries of the interstellar warriors. Throughout the Phoenix's history, during their century-long penitentiary expedition, they had encountered countless Greenskin opponents. The cancer of the universe wasn't a term thrown around lightly. These enemies truly had a widespread presence throughout the universe. Certain particularly ferocious tribes of Greenskins were capable of sweeping through and destroying several star systems. The Phoenix responded to the governor's call, arriving here from their monastery by truck. The 10 iron ox trucks assigned to the Phoenix by Gu Heng had been painted in the Phoenix style, predominantly red with white edges and patterns, a stark contrast to the Alliance Army's common grey and sandy yellow. Not only did these 10 trucks bring 5 interstellar warriors, but they also brought 100 fully armed young soldiers. The monastery of the Phoenix had previously taken in 200 teenagers under the age of 19 for training as reserves. 100 of the younger ones stayed in the monastery, continuing their training with Priest Rizzo. The 100 that accompanied Commander Maddens to Rubbish Town were generally a bit older. The Phoenix planned to throw them into battle. These young soldiers had only received a month of training at the Phoenix Monastery and didn't have the external enhancements that Gu Heng possessed. Even with the remarkable ability of the Phoenix to train new recruits, it wouldn't be enough to turn them into elite soldiers within a month. Indeed, that was the case, but the Phoenix's intention wasn't really to expect these 100 teenagers to make any significant battle achievements. Essentially, this was a selection process. They had only one genetic seed in hand, which certainly required selecting the most outstanding, the most likely candidate for successful surgery. Only those who survived on the real battlefield, those who performed the best, could potentially enter the final selection round. Gu Heng actually had reservations about this. But as it was something within the battle group's affairs, he didn't feel it was his place to meddle, so he let them be. Turning back to the present, Commander Madans and his 4 brothers found him as soon as he landed at the joint military camp outside Rubbish Town. Facing the 5 giants that towered over him by half, Gu Hang felt somewhat nervous. Madans spoke with a serious tone, "This war, we can't keep fighting it like this." "What do you mean?" "We must launch an attack as soon as possible," Schneider spoke up first, "the sooner the better, a full-scale offensive, to quickly annihilate all the greenskins and completely purify this land with fire." "Hold on, at least tell me the reason first," said Gu Hang. "I was planning to have the troops continue to show off for a while. The equipment for 2 garrison divisions hasn't yet arrived, the stockpile of shells isn't sufficient, not to mention, the overall casualty ratio is still within acceptable limits. We estimate there are about 20,000 greenskins in the ruins of the high tower. At this rate of casualties, we'll be able to exterminate those greenskins at the cost of 30,000 of our own soldiers." Schneider, of course, didn't mince words with Gu Hang. That's assuming those greenskins keep running into our defenses until they are all dead. "Do you think that's possible?" Gu Hang rolled his eyes. "Of course I know that's not possible, but the casualty ratio has to be better than if we were to attack. According to normal thinking, we should continue to maintain the defensive, let those greenskins crash against our lines until they can no longer withstand the casualties and are exhausted. Meanwhile, our side's armaments would be more abundant, and then we could counterattack. Wouldn't that be better?" "There's no chance of that," Madden said, his tone much more patient than Schneider's. "Greenskins are a very tough enemy to deal with, they're quite unique. You know they grow from the ground, right?" "I know, but growing from the ground still requires time to mature, right?" "You're right, but the Greenskin tribe is an alien species born for warfare, and the more intense the battle, the faster their tribe grows." Gu Hang frowned deeply. "You're saying, war, death, might actually cause their numbers to grow inversely." This was a counterintuitive piece of information. Before now, Gu Hang truly did not know that the greenskins had such a characteristic. Chapter 185. Greenskins are born for war. As long as they keep fighting, the development speed of greenskin spores within the same tribe will increase, resulting in more and more greenskin aliens. It's not just about the numbers, their technology also grows rapidly in the process. Madans was carefully supplementing Gu Hang's knowledge about the cancer of the universe. "Fortunately, you didn't lose. If they had won a key battle, their growth rate would have escalated even more. In fact, those guys at Rubbish Town already handed those greenskins a victory, basically stepping on the accelerator of their tribal development. Thankfully, this greenskin tribe hasn't been developing for long, and their starting point was in the urban ruins, where they say low-energy storms often blow through. If it was a warm forested area, with more fertile land, we might be facing millions of greenskins. Facing such an enemy, engaging in an attrition war is not a smart choice. A human soldier takes 20 years from birth to become a qualified warrior. Those greenskins can fight as soon as they emerge from the ground. If we don't resolve this issue quickly, we could be facing not just 20,000 greenskin orcs, but double that number of greenskins, and 10 times that number of low-level greenskin creatures like fart spirits. Their technology could even advance further, with cannons becoming more powerful and reaching further, and armed trucks becoming bigger and more ferocious. It wouldn't be surprising if some beings that could be likened to demons or monsters appeared. Sometimes among the greenskin race, there are beings that rely solely on physical strength and can match a star warrior in combat. After hearing Madden's extensive information about the greenskins, Gu Hang's face had completely darkened. Some of his previous plans had to be overturned. Just as Madden's described, the best way to counter such an enemy is to flatten them in one fell swoop, avoiding any attrition war and not hoping to reduce the enemy's numbers. Even if one doesn't flatten them in one go, it's essential to reduce their numbers to a very low level. Otherwise, the subsequent troubles would be endless. "I understand what you mean, thank you for the information." Gu Hang thanked Madans and then made a request. "I will contact the quintet right away. Colonel Yeliziah will provide us with orbital strike support. Once the orbital strike firepower cover is in place, we'll immediately launch an attack. Let's set it for 3 days from now." Madans nodded. 3 days should be fine. "Then it's settled, we'll still need your help when the time comes." 3 days was the time Gu Hang needed to distribute equipment to the garrison divisions and spend the grace points to train them to T5 level. This was a necessary preparation of the troops. Meanwhile, he also used this time to have an in-depth communication with Yeliziah in space. When Yeliziah's holographic image appeared in front of him, he saw the golden-haired woman captain elegantly slicing a piece of steak and having a glass of red wine on the side. Gu Hang's mouth twitched slightly. These were the supplies he had sent up to the quintet. The quintet had its own synthetic starch production capability and had replenished military logistics supplies before departing for Rage Owl Star. Even without any new supplies during the 2 years of the mission, they wouldn't starve, but they couldn't expect to eat too well. After all, she had helped a lot, so Gu Hang had to show some appreciation. When he was poor before, Gu Hang would remember to load up the return transport ships with consumer goods after scrounging wool from Yelazaya. Now, he would do even more so. Of course, the quintet did not dispatch ships specifically for logistical supplies. Otherwise, the cost of the transport ship taking off and landing would not even be worth the food transported. The last time the transport ship came, it was on serious business. There was a squad of battle nuns from the Saintly Lily who had come down, which was support summoned by Superior Georgette. From the Sisterhood headquarters on Corollia 3, 20 battle nuns had arrived at Rage Owl Star. Including the 2 who had died, there were 29 of them in total. Superior Georgette had taken issue with the primordial Wrath Owl sect, and in the previous period, they had finished their investigation within Revival City, capturing some deeply hidden cult members. During the previous period, the 29 battle nuns had already left Revival City, following the clues they had acquired, and headed north. Gu Hang hoped they would have good luck. If they could solve the problem of the cult on Rage Owl Star by themselves, nothing would be better. And if they needed help, Gu Hang would not be stingy. After all, they were essentially doing work on his behalf. And the ship that had brought down the 20 battle nuns, on its return journey, also took one of Colonel Yelazaya's most valued items, a letter of commendation. The letter of commendation was personally written by Gu Hang. It essentially expressed his gratitude, in his capacity as the governor of Rage Owl Star, for Colonel Yelazaya's outstanding contribution to combating and eradicating followers of the evil god who did not worship the emperor, as well as the evil god's projections. Of course, if the letter were only written by Gu Hang himself, it wouldn't be of much use. Chapter 186. The commendation letter from the planetary governor can indeed serve as a reference for military leaders to receive honors after actions. In other words, when Yelazaya presents this commendation letter and reports it, the imperial military will recognize it. However, the degree of recognition is uncertain. For a strong governor, or even one of the foundry generals who build worlds, a letter is enough for a promotion. For someone like Gu Hang, it's not quite sufficient, lacking in value. But if the commendation letter also carries the signature and the wax seal of a starfighter battle group commander and a mother superior from the sisterhood, then it's a different story. Gu Hang wasn't sure just how valuable such a commendation letter was, but at least at that moment, seeing the smiling face of Yelazaya, he knew it should be pretty good. Of course, when the transport ship returned, it wasn't just going to bring up a letter. Although the commendation letter was the most important, it wouldn't do for the cabin to be empty, so it would be good to transport some rare logistical supplies as well. Just to curry favor with the Lady of Wealth above. Inside the package were some red wines, which had been confiscated from the homes of the nobility in Revival City, said to be crafted products from certain areas in Green Valley region. As for the steaks, they came from the wild oxen beasts. After the truck production in Wuxing City had increased to nearly 200 units per month, the demand for animal power had greatly decreased. Not only did the wild oxen used by a large number of merchants in Revival City lose their value of service and were sent back to the pasture to be raised for beef and dairy purposes. And the steak Yelazaya was eating now came from those. Colonel, you seem to be in a good mood. Indeed, not bad, Yelazaya replied leisurely as she swallowed the beef and took a small sip of wine, then commented, however, the quality of your beef is subpar, the texture is too rough, the taste of the wine is also somewhat inferior. Getting choosy, are we? Just a reflection, Yelazaya continued as a server took away the dinnerware, this is the hardest time I've ever had in my life. Actually, I am still grateful for the supplies you sent up, otherwise my collected provisions wouldn't have lasted 2 years. Gu Hang coughed lightly twice, not wanting to talk further with Yelazaya about these corrupt luxuries, and turned to the matter at hand, I hope to get support for an orbital strike. What scale? Yelazaya remained unhurried. Full force. What? Yelazaya was no longer calm, what enemy on the surface do you need to face that requires me to carry out a full-force orbital strike? Alien threat. Gu Hang's answer was succinct, while Yelazaya's frown deepened. Still those aliens? Has there been some particularly significant change? Yeliziah asked this because she had been following the alien threat on Rage Owl Star before. Related intelligence, as the war progressed, would be compiled every so often and sent to the starship. She was clear about the situation on the ground. It was for this reason that she questioned it. According to the latest situation she had seen before, the fight was in a deadlock, but far from a major crisis. Gu Hang coughed lightly and said, "We can't keep having a war of attrition here with those aliens. If we don't resolve the issue completely, after a while, when a new batch of aliens emerge, we'll have to face another war on a larger scale, with an enemy that has become even more troublesome, and by then we might not be able to win. I understand the principle, but, do you know how much it costs to fire the quintet at full specs once?" Gu Hang hadn't expected Yeliziah to bring up this question. He waited silently for Yeliziah to continue speaking. Clearly, this wasn't really a question aimed at him, but more of a rhetorical one. Yeliziah continued, "The last time you asked me to help with a precision strike, it was with the scalpel shipboard missiles from the quintet, the least powerful and most cost-effective attack method. The price of such a missile is 300 tax coins, a full-scale barrage consists of over 100 scalpels. Going up one level, there is the heat hammer colossal cannon, a small-scale colossal cannon. The cost of one round of ammunition is 4,000 tax coins, and a barrage consists of 20 rounds. The highest level is the Wrath of Loyalty colossal cannon, where a single round costs 50,000 tax coins, and I have only 2 such cannons on my ship. Now do you understand how expensive it is?" The more he listened, the uglier Gu Hang's expression became. He knew it was expensive, but he didn't realize it was this expensive. The so-called tax coin isn't a conventional concept of currency. It is a tool used by the Imperial Taxation Department to measure the value of resources provided by planets during tax collection. One tax coin roughly equates to the minimum standard annual output of a population on an ordinary world, as valued by the Empire. To surrender a healthy adult is worth 5 tax coins. A well-trained soldier with a full set of individual equipment is valued at 10 tax coins. In the Imperial records, Rage Owl Star was taxed at the minimum level, paying 10 million tax coins every 2 years. Moreover, the preferential treatment Gu Hang received meant he only had to pay a quarter of that amount the first time, which was 2.5 million tax coins. And according to Yeliziah, the total cost of such a barrage would be 210,000 tax coins. Firing 50 barrages would expend enough ammunition to pay for a full tax payment from Rage Owl Star, 12 barrages, enough for Gu Hang's first tax payment. 4 barrages would cost as much as the lives of all the soldiers from the 9 Division Brigade level units that Gu Hang commanded. He understood the unspoken message of Colonel Yeliziah: an orbital strike is possible, but after it's done, are the lives of the soldiers you saved worth the cost of my ammunition? This is the stature of a Navy person. They calculate the cost of ammunition in terms of human lives. A single barrage is worth the lives of 20,000 well-trained soldiers. If you have a gap that can be filled with 20,000 lives, then don't ask the esteemed Navy masters to bomb it for you. But, all of a sudden, Gu Hang wore a smile, deeply understanding one truth: the Navy's money is not my money, but the soldiers who die, those are truly my soldiers. So he said, "We still need to bomb it." Yeliziah shook her head helplessly. "I knew you would say that. If you insist, then I'll help you. After all, the Navy's money is not my money either. Of course, one shouldn't be too excessive." Therefore, Yeliziah added, "But, you have to agree to 2 conditions. First is to identify the target. I've looked at your original plans, and I can't let expensive firepower be wasted on an indiscriminate bombardment of the entire city ruins. That would be too costly. You need to give me precise targets to improve the efficiency of the strike. This is for your own good. With such a level of targets, a full-scale attack can only happen once, so you should cherish this opportunity and strive to achieve the best combat results. Secondly, after the battle, you need to provide me a report of the effectiveness. Later, the Military Affairs Department will review these things. The combat results and expenditures need to have a reasonable justification. If the outcome is too outrageous, the Military Affairs Department will come looking for you, and you might be made to bear the costs of the used ammunition. There have been precedents for this, and I will be held responsible as well. Don't make this difficult for me." "I understand, thank you, Yeliziah." By thanking her this time, Gu Hang dropped the honorific, sounding more intimate. He knew that Yeliziah really had helped him. Otherwise, if Yeliziah truly treasured her own safety and was unwilling to take on too much responsibility, sticking strictly to regulations, it would be really difficult to get approval for the orbital strike. At most, he would probably be able to finalize some minor token action. Since she had helped him, Gu Heng was not going to deliberately put her in a difficult position. Accurately finding the target? The brothers from the Phoenix battle group could lend a hand. The starfighters, more elite than any special forces unit, infiltrating behind enemy lines to designate important strategic targets for an easier orbital strike wasn't that standard practice. Chapter 187. Mr. Gu's request was promptly accepted by Maddens without hesitation. It really was the kind of task they excelled in, at least one of them. Interstellar warriors are formidable, sure, but a perpetual weakness is their lack of numbers. In any battle of significant scale or intensity, it would be extremely foolish to commit these elite but scarce interstellar warriors to a head-on fight where attrition is the strategy. They themselves would never accept such an order. No matter how tough a powered armor is, to be honest, it can't withstand a direct hit from a 155mm howitzer shell. No matter how powerful a bomb gun is, it may penetrate the locally produced Challenger tank with no big deal, but on top-tier battlefields, if it encounters the regular Lion tanks of the Star Realm army, much less the Lion King tanks, it would be like scratching an itch. They are a scalpel, not meant to be used as a hammer. Taking advantage of the 3 days Gu Heng needed to prepare his troops for a counterattack, the 5 warriors of the Phoenix would infiltrate behind enemy lines to seek out and mark high-value strategic targets. Joining them were 28 warriors from the Storm Squad. They were the elite marine unit from the quintet, now trained by Gu Heng to T3 level, ensuring the strength of each individual was guaranteed. Even engaging in close quarters combat and facing off against an ordinary green-skinned grunt wouldn't be a big problem for them. They would temporarily come under the command of Phoenix, follow orders and act in coordination. Without much ado, a total of 33 people set out under cover of darkness. They left from the southernmost end of the entire north-south front line. To cover their operation, the 4th Infantry Battalion of the 7th Garrison Division stationed there initiated an attack. From the artillery positions in the rear, a battalion of gunners were allocated. 30 cannons were pushed forward 5 kilometers and fired 20 rounds of covering fire in the direction of the infantry battalion's intended attack. The first 5 rounds were rapid fire, and the subsequent 15 rounds were spaced about 3 to 4 minutes apart, maintaining the overall rhythm of the bombardment. Those greenskins were stunned by the explosions. In the past, they had been shelled, but generally, artillery would come into play when they launched an attack. The shrimps then would call for artillery support from the rear, and fierce firepower would cover their attack or retreat routes. The main target was still to break their advance and inflict casualties. There were also many cases where the shrimp would retaliate after the greenskins' own big guns opened fire. Firing at one's own position like today wasn't unprecedented, but it was only occasional. This moment, however, with 600 heavy artillery shells falling within an hour on a not-so-large area, was certainly something these greenskins stationed here had never experienced before. At least, the greenskins stationed in this area hadn't seen it. The orc leader here, named Bone Strength, wasn't killed by the bombing. His fortification was built on top of the ruins of a reinforced concrete building, further reinforced by hauling various building materials, quite sturdy. Unless hit directly by heavy artillery on this particular fortification, shrapnel and shock waves were unlikely to cause any trouble. However, there weren't many fortifications across the entire position that could match this level of protection. In addition, the shelling was too sudden, and casualties were feared to be significant. Of course, most casualties occurred early on. Those who survived later took cover in various bomb-proof shelters. There would indeed still be considerable losses, but these were within acceptable limits. Yet even if Bone Strength was clear on this point, he paced back and forth restlessly in his fortification, spewing greenskin profanities. He knew that the shrimp's inexplicably aggressive shelling mustn't be mere child's play. His green brain could clearly deduce that this was likely the prelude to the shrimp mounting an offensive. But at the moment, he couldn't run out of his fortification and kick his boys into gear, making them brace for battle. With artillery falling every few minutes, leaving the fortification could easily get him killed. If he were killed, he wouldn't be able to fight anymore. So he had to continue to stew in his fury, hiding. But soon, the opportunity to fight came. After the last round of shelling and 10 minutes without any new shells falling, he heard gunfire and the shouts of close combat. He perked up, leading a few boys, and burst out of the fortification. They reached the ground still warm and smoky from the heavy artillery bombardment. Looking toward the direction from which the shots were coming, he could vaguely see the approaching shrimp in the not-so-distant place. The shrimp advanced quickly, constantly splitting off forces to clear every fortification and pile of rubble they passed. In many places, in Bone Strength's recollection, there were his own boys on guard. However, there were very few places where battles occurred. In those places without fighting, the shrimp would just go in and come out again. Bone Strength could guess that the boys he had sent to hold those positions were probably obliterated during the previous artillery strikes. Otherwise, they wouldn't have allowed the shrimp to walk in without any resistance. How many boys had died? He didn't know. He bellowed loudly, "Waik! Boys! Roll out! The shrimp are storming us! It's time to show how tough we are! We can't let the shrimp look down on us!" Chapter 188. Roars of battle echoed from the numerous orc youngsters around, and a crowd of them crawled out from their previous hiding spots. Some even drove out armed pickups that had survived the previous shelling, while others rolled out cannons made from iron barrels strapped together. However, the overall number appeared to be significantly less than what had been estimated. Half of them had not come out. Those damn big booms were indeed formidable. But no matter. Even if only half were left, they could still slaughter all those shrimps that dared to come out to fight. With his subordinates in tow, he charged forward. Observing the situation at the front, Reed Meshako couldn't help but shake his head. He was formerly a staff sergeant from the original Cody Company and later enlisted as a political officer under Colonel Tadeusa's recruitment. After the reorganization in Rubbish Town, he was assigned to the 7th Garrison Division 4th Regiment as a political officer, his rank jumping directly to captain. His military rank had risen extremely fast, but this was a common occurrence among the old units that had followed Gu Hang for a longer time. The army expanded rapidly, and as long as the old soldiers ensured loyalty and a willingness to advance, their promotion was swift. When the Rear Command Center demanded their full cooperation with the Phoenix Battle Group's operation, and Commander Maddens ordered a diversionary frontal attack, Meshako carried out the mission resolutely. He knew their regiment commander was not keen on doing this, even trying his best to disrupt the organization when the adventurers were incorporated into the regular army, stripping the formerly adventurous company commanders of their private ownership over the troops. However, the adventurers' nature was not so easily worn away. They would instinctively fear such missions that required significant sacrifices, especially when it was to cover someone else's operations. Yet, this is the difference between soldiers and adventurers. Under his strong insistence and the military orders, the 4th Infantry Battalion still launched the attack. Before the battle, whether soldiers or officers, all harbored fear. In the past, the orcs had cast a vast shadow over them. Even if hundreds of shells had paved the way for them, the inherent fear persisted as they took over. This was where Reed Meshako felt discontent. Fortunately, the resistance they faced during the fight was not strong. The orc troops were clearly stunned by the bombardment, with a large number of orcs dead in their fortifications. The number that could initially mount a defense was small. Those orcs still displayed a strong combat will. In close exchanges of fire, it often took the lives of 2 or 3 human soldiers to kill one orc. If the orcs got too close for combat, and since they were not beast slaughter group soldiers even with bayonets, they often hesitated to fight. This wasn't an issue of tactics or military skills but a matter of morale and courage. But eventually, the 4th Regiment overwhelmed the orcs with their greater numbers. It turned out that orcs could run away too. When 3 or 5 orcs poked their heads out from the fortifications and then saw hundreds of human soldiers, guns drawn, firing at them, they too would turn tail and flee. Some were shot dead from behind, and such orcs were the most despised. Soon, the few surviving orc youngsters returned, rallying a large wave of over 200 orcs behind them. The orcs howled in scorn at the fleeing youngsters, and those being mocked turned back in anger and fury. In the exchange of fire, orcs kept falling, as did soldiers. This was a bloody melee, where the death of one orc often resulted in 2 or 3 human soldiers being killed. Continuing to fight at such an exchange rate, victory was of course inevitable for the human side. Especially as they brought out weapons such as rocket launchers and mortars, and one of the charging armed pickups was blown up halfway there. All it would take was about 500 casualties at most. This was estimated based on the worst-case scenario. In reality, once a certain number of orcs were killed, their threat level drastically decreased, their morale collapsed, and they turned to flee, just like those encountered before. Persisting in the fight, the humans wouldn't suffer nearly as many losses. But even so, the first to flinch and hesitate to move forward were the human soldiers. The sight of their comrades being blown apart by the orcs' powerful firearms chilled them to the bone. After sustaining about 100 casualties, they started to show signs of breaking down. Reed Meshako was furious. He bellowed at the regimental commander beside him, "Look at these soldiers. It's a disgrace." The commander of the 4th Regiment found himself in a dilemma. He had given orders for the units to maintain the line and push forward, but what could he do if they wouldn't budge? He dared not talk back. This red cap was an officer assigned directly by the governor, playing a role similar to that of a supervising officer. Seeing his demeanor, Meshako became even more enraged at the lack of spirit. "To the front line! Let's go to the front line together! We must lead by example!" He drew his pistol and yanked the commander along. The two of them, along with the security company, began to personally push forward. Meshako knew that as a commander, his greatest responsibility was to direct the battle, not to fight on the front lines. Going to the forefront, even for him, wasn't much different in combat ability than an ordinary soldier. Chapter 189. But now is a special moment, there's no more commanding to be done. What the soldiers lack is not strategy, not tactics, but courage. What's needed is for senior officers to lead by example, to put themselves at the front. While leading the guard company, the battalion commander pressed forward and encountered a unit that was fighting while retreating. Myshik was furious. He grabbed the unit commander by the collar and screamed, "The military order given to you was to advance. Advance. Advance again. Who gave you the order to retreat?" "I." The company commander's face turned pale, unable to speak. Myshik kicked him in the stomach, knocking him down, and raised his pistol to his head. Disobeying orders and showing cowardice in battle is seen as desertion. As an officer, your crimes are even greater. "No, no." The company commander was still trying to argue his case, and the battalion commander standing beside Myshik also wanted to say something to persuade him. But Myshik wasn't interested in listening and pulled the trigger without hesitation. The bullet went through the head of the officer who had just received the rank of second lieutenant, and his body fell lifelessly. Then, Myshik shouted to the squad instructor beside him, who seemed a bit dazed by what he witnessed, "You're in command now. Take your company and follow me." The instructor snapped to attention and quickly called out to the troops. Myshik waved his hand, signaling for the guard company to follow, and said to the battalion commander beside him, "For the governor. We are bound to win. You can't continue as before. We are soldiers. Not scavengers searching for scraps in a trash heap." I understand. Pick up your rifle. Fight like a warrior." Watching the battalion commander reluctantly move out, Myshik picked up the field telephone again and issued orders to every squad instructor in the battalion, strictly ordering them to ensure that the troops were always on the offensive, and those who showed timidity could be executed on the spot. Afterward, Myshik fired his pistol into the air and roared to those around him, "Comrades! Charge with me!" Under his strict commands and after he and the battalion commander led the guard company into battle, the troops' timid situation finally began to reverse. Under the leadership of officers at all levels, especially the political commissars in the instructor system, the troops began to regain an offensive posture. As the distance between the two sides closed further, the fight quickly became bloodier and more brutal. The greenskins' advantage in close combat was being put to good use, and the casualties on the human side increased. However, the advantages of greater numbers and stronger firepower on the human side were still maintained, along with higher precision in close-range shooting. Human warriors continued to fall, even among the officers, but the greenskins were also falling at an even faster rate. When the 4th Battalion's losses reached 15%, meaning over 200 people were down, there were only about 70 to 80 greenskins left. Reed Meshako knew clearly that they were now in a desperate situation. Because they were too close to retreat, the bloody battle had fully triggered his fighting spirit. His skin turned greener, and his body size even grew slightly during the combat. "Waik!" he bellowed, bursting out of the cover and charging toward the nearest position occupied by human warriors. Inspired by him, all the living greenskins entered a frenzied state. The final charge began. Reed Meshako, wielding a heavy spear, fired 6 shots on the charge, killing 5 soldiers. At the same time, he was hit by at least 100 bullets. Blood covered his green skin, one of his eyes was blinded, but his remaining single eye grew even more ferocious. He burst into the position of the infantry platoon, instantly turning into a meat grinder on the battlefield. His heavy chopping knife spun like a whirlwind of death, and in just a short while, he slaughtered all the warriors there. Despite following combat tactics, arming themselves with bayonets for close combat as he approached, the human warriors were no match for the greenskins in terms of strength, durability, or even agility. Stabbed by the bayonet 7 or 8 times, Reed Meshako showed no signs of weakening, and with a backhand strike, he slaughtered all those daring enough to engage him in close combat. When the courageous had all died, the rest lost their will to fight. After the sergeant major was killed in battle, the few surviving members of the infantry platoon panicked and fled. When the supporting company instructor also had his upper body blown apart by a shot, the entire company began to collapse. This triggered a chain reaction. The greenskins, who charged with Reed Meshako and after suffering 20-odd casualties, broke through the front line of one company. Then, the 2 companies beside it, caught off guard, began to show signs of collapse in the face of the ferociously charging greenskins. Reed Meshak observed this sign. He would not allow a victory within reach to slip away again. He immediately led the guard company to the breach, and strictly ordered several nearby companies to do the same. In his words, stacking corpses would still suffice to kill off the remaining 50 greenskins. Reed Meshako also saw the continuously shouting Red Cap. He howled as he charged towards him. He reloaded his heavy spear and fired wildly toward Meshak's direction. In a moment, 3 or 4 of Meshak's surrounding warriors were blasted dead, and that unkillable greenskin leader was rushing straight toward him. Chapter 190. Meshak's mood was very calm at this moment. He knew he had made a mistake, having forcefully boosted the morale of the entire battalion, and now he had come too close to the front line, so close that the enemy could charge directly at him. If he were to die here, the morale of the whole battalion could collapse. Then, it would truly become a joke where thousands were overwhelmed by just dozens of greenskins. Yet, this mistake was also one that had to be made. This troop, newly reorganized from adventurers, had not had sufficient time to instill proper ideological work, and their morale was low. If he had not done so earlier, they might not have been able to fight to this extent. He knew the odds were against him, but he could not run away, either. He could only draw his handgun, stand still, his black coat fluttering in the wind. He stood tall and proud, firing bullets continuously at the greenskin charging towards him. Even in death, he would die standing. He hoped that his bearing before death would inspire the surrounding soldiers. The enemy was already on their last legs, just one more push and they could wipe them out completely. The handgun's ammunition did minimal damage to the greenskins, offering only a symbolic resistance. But right then, the sound of booming gunfire came from behind him. Immediately after, heavy footsteps approached quickly and soon passed by him. It was a giant in red-powered armor. The Emperor's angels had arrived. The gunfire in front, it was obviously from a grenade launcher. The flying grenades hit 3 greenskins behind the bone leader, each one killed with a single shot. With the level of a veteran space marine, within a distance of tens of meters, there were no wasted shots. The power of the grenade launcher could not be compared to the small barrel of a G9 rifle. A shot hitting the greenskin was lethal. However, the 2 grenades aimed at the bone leader did not claim his life. He managed to dodge the first one at the last moment, not truly dodging a bullet but making a predictive move based on seeing the space marine charging out from behind that red helmet. As for the grenade that did hit, it landed squarely in his right chest, leaving a gaping hole. The enraged orc chieftain merely paused in stride, showing no sign of weakness, and continued his charge with a howl. The bone leader had never seen a shrimp of his size, especially one entirely wrapped in red cans, but he could sense this was a formidable foe. He was thrilled to face such a strong opponent. He raised his thick-bladed cleaver high, slashing at the red-armored giant. The charging phoenix warrior twisted his waist, dodged the slash, and smoothly drew a combat blade, stabbing into the greenskin's midsection. With the momentum of the charge, he sliced open the wound, and a large amount of blood mixed with entrails sprayed out. But the bone leader was still not dead. He even had the strength to counterattack. He grabbed the space marine's arm with one hand, pulling fiercely, and with a trip of his foot, he managed to throw his opponent to the ground. The bone leader flipped on top, snarling, seemingly oblivious to the pain in his midsection. He pressed one hand against the chin of the space marine's helmet, while the other hand raised his thick-backed cleaver high, as if to decapitate the phoenix this way. Yet that blow would never land. In the midst of this, the downed and pinned phoenix warrior had rapidly stabbed the bone leader several times in the chest and neck with his combat dagger, ending his life once and for all. Pushing the corpse aside, the warrior in the red armor stood up, looking around. The battle had all but ended. Chapter 191. After Schneider had killed the biggest, greenest orc chieftain, the battle was almost at its end. His 4 battle brothers, along with the 28 Storm Squad soldiers who were considered quite capable in the eyes of the interstellar warriors, and with the covering fire from the infantry battalion, killed all 4 or 5 dozen orcs that had charged with the chieftain. The abilities of the interstellar warriors need not be mentioned, apart from encountering a genetically enhanced, somewhat capable green-skinned chieftain that made him exert himself a little. His battle brothers scarcely found any opponents of note. The ordinary green-skinned brutes stood no chance against the electromagnetic rifles in the hands of the Storm Squad's special operations soldiers. Unlike the G9 rifles, which they could resist, a dozen or so bullets from these would typically kill them. Once he was sure that all the orcs had been killed and there were no survivors to leak any information about their own party, he could finally relax. They hadn't planned on taking action originally. The proactive strike by the 4th Infantry Battalion was meant to cover their operations. It would certainly be best to eliminate all the orcs in the area, for the most perfect infiltration is achieved by killing every enemy. Even if the attack failed, it didn't really matter. After drawing enough attention, the 33-man Special Task Squad could completely bypass the battlefield from the flank while the front lines were hot, just as stealthily. In fact, that was their original plan. However, upon observing the situation on the front line, the respected commander changed his mind and decided to execute the first strategy: eradicate the enemy. Schneider knew that their commander Maddens couldn't bear to watch those mortal soldiers dying in droves, especially to cover their mission. Of course, he didn't object either. After all, as long as they killed every orc so none could run back with news, it was fine. With only a few dozen left, it wouldn't be a hassle to kill them all. The key point was also to satisfy a thirst for combat. After the battle, Schneider removed his helmet, revealing his shiny bald head. He felt a peculiar gaze, so he turned his head and saw that red-hatted soldier staring at him. Ordinarily, Schneider would disdain and outright ignore these mortals, but at this moment, he couldn't help but remember the red-hatted Tithes who had achieved what his dead brother could not. And the one before him, though he had performed no feats of valor, nevertheless faced danger without fear, maintaining a warrior's dignity in the face of death. He deserved respect. Almost involuntarily, he nodded to the red-hatted soldier, then turned and walked away. Reed Meshako also snapped out of it. He had actually survived. Given the combat between that interstellar warrior and the orc, there was no doubt that if it were him, he would have died 800 times over. It seemed that the gap between him, a mere mortal, and those monstrous demons was still vast. But regardless, they seemed to have won the battle. Slowly lowering the gun in his hand, he turned to find their commander. They still needed to sweep the area, and then transport the wounded and even the bodies of dead comrades back, even those whose deaths were particularly gruesome, taking at least the identifiers, such as armbands or breast badges, that symbolized soldier status. After cleaning up the battlefield, they would retreat. This position couldn't be held for long. The fortifications made by the orcs were shoddy to begin with, and now they were even more so after the bombardment. Moreover, this place was far from other friendly lines and difficult to support. All these issues meant that they couldn't possibly stand a chance if the orcs counterattacked. But abandoning this position didn't mean their sortie was in vain. In addition to providing cover for the special operations squads, the casualties they inflicted on the enemy were considerable. In this battle, nearly 500 orcs had died. In contrast, on the human side, the toll was over 320 casualties. This casualty ratio even exceeded their defensive battles. Of course, there was a special reason for this. After all, the cost to the human side wasn't just over 300 lives but also included 600 rounds of heavy artillery shells. Had they not recently received a shipment of newly manufactured shells from Wuxing City, they would have hated to fire off so many in just 1 hour. At least half of the orcs killed were blown up during the initial artillery barrage. Of the remaining 200 or so, more than 50 were dealt with by the special operations teams, and the real achievements of the 4th Infantry Battalion were just over 100 orcs. Yet, a nearly 3:1 exchange rate was still acceptable. What couldn't be ignored, however, was the inherent risk. They had won this time, completely annihilating the enemy. But what if they hadn't won? If it wasn't for Meshako decisively executing several officers by his iron hand during a moment of wavering morale, mandating that supervisors at all levels maintain discipline, and leading by example at the front to boost morale, they might well have crumbled at that time. Once collapsed, the death toll during the retreat would likely have skyrocketed. Not only would they fail to outkill the orcs, but during the pursuit, their casualties could have multiplied several times, and if pursued fiercely, even upon returning to their original positions, they might not have been able to stop a total collapse, leading to serious trouble. Chapter 192. Fighting is a matter where the winning side always ends up with more spoils. Besides wiping out a considerable number of greenskins, they had gained something else, an improvement in the army's spirit and morale. This had been a somewhat hard-fought battle, but they had won in the end. Although the process had its twists and turns, as long as they won, it bolstered the entire army's morale, combat confidence, and experience. The soldiers who had directly confronted the greenskins and survived would be less fearful when facing them again. The shadow that these greenskins had cast over them during their time as adventurers had been profound. Any alleviation in their phobia of greenskins was welcome. While the 4th Infantry Battalion was cleaning up the battlefield, a 33-member Special Operations Squad had already embarked on their journey once more. From this point onwards, there would be no more friendly forces to cover them. But that wasn't much needed anymore. After breaking through the enemy's most concentrated front lines and reaching the rear, within the 60-kilometer wide and nearly 100-kilometer deep urban ruins, it was clear that the greenskins couldn't possibly staff every area with their forces. On the contrary, with only tens of thousands of them, the area belonging to them was full of gaps. Occasional glimpses of greenskins and goblins did not mean they could easily spot the traces of the squad. The Space Marines' stealth capabilities were unrivaled. Despite being clad in heavy-powered armor, when they wished to be silent, their footsteps were indeed soundless. Likewise, the 28 Special Forces members were just as proficient in the art of stealth. They would spot the enemy first in most instances, it was rare for them to be discovered. When operating deep behind enemy lines, they avoided combat as much as possible to reduce the chance of being exposed. However, if they couldn't avoid a confrontation, for example, if they were actually discovered, or if someone was on their route of advance and bypassing them would take too long, they would then choose to engage. Even when they engaged, they would strive not to fire their guns. They would close in quietly, strike swiftly, with combat daggers and military sabers becoming their primary weapons. Madden's chainsword did not rev its roaring sound, merely relying on its teeth to tear through people was enough. And truly, there was no target worthy of engaging his chainsaw for. And so, they operated within the ruins for approximately 24 hours, with only a few hours of rest in between. They pushed as deep as possible and then spread out as much as possible to broaden their reconnaissance. Unfortunately, the greenskins were very difficult to communicate with, and since there was no common language, they couldn't capture one for interrogation to obtain the desired information. But in the afternoon of the second day, they made a significant discovery. They discovered a staging ground for the Greenskin tribe. Located some 60 kilometers deep from the front line, a team from Storm Squad stumbled upon a group of goblins driving trucks and pushing carts, converging on a particular spot. After relaying the information back, the entire team began moving in that direction, and soon they found the staging ground. The Greenskins had cleared a large open area where over 10,000 greenskin creatures were rowdily assembling. 1/3 were greenskin younglings, and about twice their number were goblins. Goblins are also a kind of greenskin, monstrous creatures that grow from greenskin spores as well. They are much smaller and weaker than the orc, young, cowardly, and timid, but not any less cruel. They bully the weak and fear the strong. Facing a strong enemy, they quickly disintegrate in morale and scatter unless kept in line by orcs. But when the enemy is weaker than them, or vastly outnumbered, their psychological advantage kicks in, and they become the cruelest executioners, especially fond of torture. In greenskin society, goblins often serve as slave laborers, orc servants, or even food. In this starting position, the mere number of enemies was already substantial. Setting aside those nimble devils, there were more than 3,000 orcs alone. This was almost more than any other greenskin orcs they would face on the front line. Moreover, reinforcements continued to stream in from all directions. As for the final number they could gather, no one knew. Not to mention, the greenskins gathered here not only outnumbered others, but their equipment was also very sophisticated. Armed pickups and iron barrel cannons had already been encountered, but Maddens and his crew had spotted 2 other big fellows. One of them was an armed truck. It was called a truck, but in reality, its rear cabin was covered with armored plates and provided outward extending firing positions, making the whole back of the truck awkwardly shaped. On top of the cabin was a turret gun, and the front was equipped with a bulldozer blade. Overall, the appearance was one of chaos, wildness, and irrationality. However, this is the essence of greenskin technology. No matter how irrational it might seem, if greenskins believe it to be rational, then it can move and is quite effective. The other invention, also in the same style, made those present feel somewhat heavy-hearted. It was a powered armor, a war mecha. Whatever it was, it had been seen among many of the greenskin tribes. Humans called it a killer can. They stuffed a nimble devil or a disabled orc into a metal can. Due to the greenskins' staggering technology, this was clearly not something that could be worn or removed at will, but rather something that would fuse with the machine for life. From the upper and lower sides of the can, mechanical structures extended out as limbs. On the upper limbs, there were melee or ranged weapons attached, and on both sides of the can were large-caliber machine guns. This contraption had appeared on many battlefields ravaged by greenskins. They were not the main armored force of the greenskin army, as they had even bigger contraptions. However, when such a 3-meter-tall device appeared on the battlefield and could maneuver in places where many armored vehicles couldn't, its level of armor and firepower caused despair among human infantry. Even interstellar soldiers could not ignore such an adversary. A few shots from the machine guns on the sides of the kin were enough to breach powered armor. The twin-barreled, auto-loading rocket launcher it held in one hand also had formidable lethality, and being hit by that large axe was fatal. Of course, generally speaking, the interstellar soldiers won more often. Each of the 5 veterans present had destroyed at least 5 killer cans in their careers. But those were career achievements, not the result of a single battle. If they were suddenly surrounded, even 2 or 3 of them could be overwhelming. And now, in this still gathering greenskin army, they had spotted 10 killer cans. With more greenskins joining, who knew if there would be even more? The armed trucks comparable to Strider armored vehicles, the killer cans equivalent to a beggar's version of powered armor, over 3,000 greenskins gathered with several powerful leaders, or tough lads far stronger than the average orc. Such a force, if directed to the front line for a direct assault, would result in catastrophic consequences. Unprepared humans would almost certainly be crushed instantly. Fortunately, they had discovered them. Now that they were aware of the intelligence, things were easier to handle. They did not alert the enemy, and after marking the coordinates, they quietly left and conveyed the intelligence to the governor. They had not brought any communication equipment, nor was it necessary. The powered armor worn by the interstellar soldiers was equipped with the necessary communication modules and was already connected to the frontline command post's wireless communication channel. The communication towers erected at the command post did this job, and during encounters with greenskins, there was little concern about the threat of eavesdropping on the radio. What the governor would do with this intelligence was beyond their concern for now. They received further orders to continue their reconnaissance, following the designated objectives to find the greenskins' main base, their armories, their farms, their breeding grounds. They might have lacked clues before, but now things were manageable. 2 interstellar soldiers were left with a few members of Storm Squad to keep an eye on the large group of greenskins at the starting position, while the rest followed the route of the converging greenskins in the opposite direction to search for the source. Chapter 193. After receiving the message, Gu Hang couldn't even enjoy his meal. There were 10,000 greenskins, over 3,000 of which were proper orcs, and their numbers were still growing. There was already a disparity in single combat capabilities, with the greatest difference being in their ability to withstand attacks. Now, the enemy also had all sorts of crude, laughable, but absolutely formidable heavy firepower and equipment. This was already a very huge threat. Well, Gu Hang had been planning to wait 2 days to call for orbital bombardment before launching a full counterattack, but now were those greenskins going to launch a full-scale attack first? Luckily, this intelligence was gathered in advance. Had they been caught completely unprepared by such an onslaught, there would have been serious trouble. Gu Hang was considering solutions. First and foremost, the mobilization of troops must be accelerated. The troops that were resting at the joint military camp now had to be urgently assembled. The soldiers currently on the front lines had actually been reduced to about 50,000 strong. Roughly another 50,000 were resting and reorganizing in the rear. Even though the front line was short-handed by half, it was definitely much more stable than when those adventurers from Rubbish Town were stationed there. The soldiers, who had been reorganized and equipped more reliably, and whose military skills had dramatically improved, were much more effective than the adventurers. But wasn't the plan to prepare for an onslaught, even a full counterattack? The follow-up troops, of course, needed to be brought forward as a reserve force, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. Of course, if they weren't needed at all, that would be for the best. The orbital strike firepower that had been requested previously from Yeliziah was meant to address this kind of situation, wasn't it? If those greenskins were scattered, hiding in the ruins of the city, they would be difficult to hit. Orbital strikes may be powerful, but could they reduce an already ruined city to dust? Those greenskins hiding in the rubble, with their strong vitality, those in the core area of the bombardment would be doomed, buried alive. But those in the peripheral areas might well survive. Now, however, they had gathered together and even cleared an open space to use as a staging ground for their attack. Wasn't this just setting themselves up to be targeted? Gu Heng was even tempted to ask Yeliziah to first conduct a small-scale, yet more targeted bombardment. With a few heat hammer colossal cannons and 10 scalpel shipborne missiles directed at that staging ground, it might not be possible to kill all the greenskins assembled there, but taking out 90% of them was likely doable. But after some thought, Gu Heng restrained this tempting impulse. Haste won't bring success. To strike now would not maximize benefits. Yeliziah could secure just one chance for bombardment, it had to be timed well. Be patient, just a little more patient. What he needed to do now was ensure that his troops were ready for any challenge and for taking the offensive before patiently waiting for front-line reports to make his decisions. Deep within the ruins of a tall tower, while on the move, Madden suddenly posed a question to Schneider by his side. These greenskins are not quite right, do you feel it? After pondering for a moment, Schneider replied, they themselves are not a problem, they're no different from the greenskins we've eliminated in the past. That is the biggest problem. Madden said, they shouldn't be this powerful. Their numbers are not enough, just a few tens of thousands, insufficient to sustain a disaster. If the greenskin spores landed on this planet due to some reason, took root and sprouted, and then this tribe developed from scratch, by this stage, at this number, they should only be able to maintain a very primitive state of technology. Even the natives of Rubbish Town who gave those greenskins some intelligence in battle to accelerate their development shouldn't have allowed them to reach this level of technology so quickly. Are you suggesting that these greenskins did not develop purely from the local environment? Schneider's attitude became more cautious. If that were the case, and these greenskins came from a powerful, interstellar tribe, it would be a big problem. But soon, Schneider dismissed the idea, it's unlikely. No reports have ever suggested Rage Owl Star has been attacked by an extraterrestrial force. If a greenskin tribe with star-traveling capabilities set its sights on this planet, they wouldn't just send a very small team. Several large warships carrying hundreds of thousands or even millions of greenskins to rapidly reproduce and inundate the planet, that's their usual modus operandi. Maddens agreed with Schneider's reasoning, that's what makes this whole affair contradictory. We must remind our brothers not to treat these greenskins as mere savage or primitive orcs. They must heighten their vigilance. Losing a brother in the battle at Revival City Outer Power Plant is something I truly do not wish to see again. Hearing the squad leader speak this way, the other four also fell silent. They spoke no further. Following the greenskins' supply routes and troop reinforcements to track down the enemy headquarters was not challenging. By the evening of the second day of their journey, they had already found their target. Those greenskins were, of course, busy preparing for war. Their headquarters were brightly lit, and their factories were bustling. Chapter 194. Interstellar Warriors of Storm Squad didn't have the capability to infiltrate the enemy's main base. After all, without the conditions for disguised reconnaissance, cross-species exploration can only go so far. But it was enough. They marked the location of the greenskin main base, their munitions factory, and then in the surrounding area, they found 3 large-scale breeding farms. Those huge, tropical plant-like things had grown sturdily amidst the urban ruins. Just as Maddens had told Gu Heng before, this was definitely not an ideal place for the greenskin orcs to breed and thrive. Even though these greenskins had tried their best to clear a relatively flat area, exposing the soil and diverting water flows as much as possible, the soil was unsuitable, the light insufficient, and the water resources not abundant enough. The greenskins were resilient enough to grow in such an environment, breeding one batch after another. It was now the harvesting season for the greenskin plants. They saw with their own eyes, under the lights, the crooked plants with huge seed pods hanging down. Something seemed to be wriggling inside, and then suddenly, the pods opened, and a greenskin creature would fall out. Such a process kept happening before their eyes. Most of the time, the creatures that fell out were of varying sizes but similar in form to beasts. These creatures, known as skugs, were a domesticated livestock bred by the orc herders and had always been part of the greenskin tribes. These creatures lacked intelligence and were vicious by nature, with sharp teeth and mouths that could open exaggeratedly wide. In fact, in the greenskins ecosystem, they served the role of livestock. Some were used for grooming, some for food, some raised by the orc kids as pets, and the largest ones could even be ridden into battle. These skugs fed on various kinds of trash. Skugs ate what the orcs wouldn't, and the orcs ate skugs in return. They, along with fungi, were a major food source for the orcs. Besides the skug beasts, the second most numerous were the fart spirits. They were the orcs' servants, cannon fodder, and also a source of food when necessary. And fewer in number were the regular greenskin orcs. Whether skug beasts, fart spirits, or orcs, all of them were in an adult state the moment they hit the ground. This breeding farm was indeed in its harvest season. If the 3 breeding farms they found operated with such efficiency and completed their incubation, there would probably be an additional 20,000 greenskin orcs and at least 50 or 60,000 fart spirits within a month. Maddens was grateful that he had seriously warned Gu Hang of the risks involved and was relieved that Gu Hang heeded his warning, not ignoring the threat. Otherwise, they would have been in big trouble. What followed was relatively simple. It was just a matter of marking the coordinates. They couldn't be very precise because they were still some distance away from their targets when marking them. Even at that distance, they encountered greenskins a few times but silently took them out. Given the disciplinary standards of the greenskins, losing a few individuals likely wouldn't be noticed. They lose plenty every day just from their internal brawls and revelry. But even if the markings weren't exactly precise, it didn't matter much. An approximate location would suffice. The colossal cannon's area of impact was still very large. A scalpel missile could almost destroy a small wind farm, not to mention the far more powerful colossal cannon and the Wrath of Loyalty, a large-scale colossal cannon. Of course, to increase efficiency, they still assigned different value levels to these places. The 2 highest value points were the main base and the departure position where the greenskin army was gathering. The next priorities were the munitions factory, the breeding farms, and the locations within the greenskin army where the killing jars were positioned. Then, they marked a bunch of places that they couldn't explore thoroughly but suspected were of value. After completing these tasks, they moved away from the greenskin main base and then notified Mr. Gu. Soon after, they received a reply from the governor. Leave the area as soon as possible, you have 14 hours to get out of the orbital strike's range. Please ensure your safety, and after the orbital strike is over, confirm the results of the strike. Received. You've worked hard. After replying to the Special Task Force's message, Gu Hang let out a deep breath. All preparations were finally complete. He contacted Yelizaya again, provided the relevant strike coordinates, and informed the female colonel that all actions were proceeding as planned. The orbital strike would arrive as scheduled at 11 o'clock Terra Standard Time the next day. His troops would complete their pre-battle preparations before then, eating a good meal, and after the orbital bombardment ended, they would launch an attack against the enemy in front. The greenskin orc front with which they were faced would not be subjected to overly intense bombardment, only a few scalpel missiles would precisely hit several key points. The colossal cannon would not strike here. The main reason was that the power of the colossal cannon was too great, its coverage too broad, and its precision, compared to scalpel missiles, was less reliable. A slight deviation and it could easily cover their own positions as well. It was better to use a few scalpel blasts, and then leave the rest to their own troops. Chapter 195. At the front line, Lucy Lee Koxi, the commander of the 3rd Independent Regiment who was earnestly striving to regain the title of Beast Slaughter Group, had just concluded a battle meeting and seen off Colonel Tadeus, the Inspector General of the Army's political work. Colonel Tadeus had conveyed the governor's orders to them, announcing in a meeting attended by all military chiefs of staff from company level upwards and political instructors that the 3rd Independent Regiment would be the fist, the vanguard, in the comprehensive counter-offensive at noon the next day. Their objective was to tear open the greenskins' defences right at the middle section of the entire defensive line, completely seize their positions, split the front line into 2, and create a gap for the mechanized 3 composite camps to penetrate. Afterwards, once the subsequent friendly forces took over the position, and troops were allocated, accompanying 1 composite camp, they were to execute a sweeping movement to the north side, cut off the retreat space of the northern greenskin orcs, and complete an encirclement with the forces on the front, thoroughly annihilating the greenskin orcs present. All the commanding officers and warriors silently listened to Tadeus recounting the battle objectives and demands. The silence continued. But this was by no means fear or dread. Lee Kexi could see a fire in the eyes of his subordinates. And he felt the same way. They had waited for too long. All right, everyone go back, Li Kexi broke the silence. Return to your companies and get ready. There are 13 hours left until tomorrow noon. The staff will break down tomorrow's assault mission, and by tomorrow morning at the latest, it will be in your hands. This is the battle we have long awaited, and an opportunity we wouldn't even dare to dream of in the past. I have just one request, fight beautifully. We must honor those we have lost, the hatred for which we would lay down our lives to avenge, and the opportunity the governor has given us. Roar! The officers stood up thunderously, then returned to their respective troops. Andrei Alexei, the political commissar assigned to the independent regiment, was somewhat at a loss. He had just been thinking of using his position as a political officer to boost the morale of the officers, only to find it seemed entirely unnecessary. Commander Li Kexi patted his shoulder without offering much in the way of explanation. The warriors of the Beast Slaughter group had no idea how many of them could truly sleep well. But they would force themselves to rest properly, all for the sake of showing their best in the battle of the following day. The night was exceptionally long. No matter how long the dark night, there always comes an end. As daylight brightened, Li Kexi, who had awakened, went to inspect the front lines of the troops. He watched the soldiers eat, he observed them checking and maintaining their weapons, he saw officers conversing with the warriors. All of this strangely settled his anxious heart. They had done everything they could, only waiting for the order to attack. The issued pocket watches ticked to 11 o'clock at noon. The order to attack had not yet been given, but he first saw many red dots vaguely appearing in the sky. A meteor shower? No, he quickly dismissed that thought. These must be part of the powerful strike Colonel Tadeus had mentioned earlier. At the time, he had thought that the rear artillery positions would fire relentlessly, but it seemed that wasn't all. He watched those red meteors streaking across the sky, getting closer and closer, then falling onto the ruins that stretched as far as the eye could see. Immediately thereafter, two huge, almost city-encompassing spheres of light, suddenly appeared. Along with those two enormous orbs of light, there were many smaller ones, but because of the obstruction from the ruins, they didn't seem quite as distinct. The scene felt strangely peculiar, with only brightness and no sound, as if watching a silent film. But the thing they were waiting for soon arrived. The earth was shaking. It was as if there had been an earthquake, with some soldiers, who hadn't secured their footing, even staggering about. Even some of the ruins that had been weakened by artillery fire during previous battles collapsed amidst this tremor. Fortunately, the fortifications they were hiding in had been specially reinforced, so there were no casualties as a result. Then came the shockwave, accompanied by a tremendous noise. It was like a gust of wind blowing through, carrying with it a sensation of scorching heat, causing many to retreat several steps, feeling a heavy pressure in their chests. Although physically uncomfortable, from Li Kexi down, all the soldiers of the 3rd Independent Regiment felt immensely relieved in their hearts. The explosion had occurred deep within the ruins of the tall towers, where the green Skin Orcs were most concentrated. If the aftermath of the explosion could be felt so clearly from dozens of kilometers away, whether it be the searing heat or the shockwave, what about those green skins at the epicenter? Even if those monsters had much stronger resilience than humans, they could not possibly survive such an onslaught. As long as they could eliminate the enemies before them, this green skin disaster that had spread over several years and had become increasingly severe would end by their hands. Li Kexi was already eager to command his troops to charge. But it wasn't time yet. The order to attack had still not come. Instead, a whistling sound came from overhead. The artillery positions in the rear began to assert their power. On the joint artillery grounds, 155 mm howitzers were lined up in sequence, barrels pointed towards the sky, firing without interruption. The production of artillery shells was limited, and Wuxing City had to produce a lot to sustain the logistical supply for an army totaling hundreds of thousands, including armored vehicles, bullets, guns, equipment, explosives, hand grenades, rocket launchers, and cannons. They had been working hard to increase the production of shells, but it still couldn't withstand too intense a consumption. However, since today had been decided as the day for the final battle, there was no need to conserve any more. Hundreds of cannons fired at full speed, raining down shell after shell on the orc positions at a rate of 500 rounds per minute. This was an all-out barrage like never before, with the artillerymen no longer caring about the lifespan of their barrels or the consumption of shells. They planned to drop 15,000 heavy shells on the green skin orc positions within half an hour, and the total stock of shells left was just under 20,000. The remaining 4 to 5,000 shells were not to be conserved either, but kept in reserve to coordinate with the infantry charge. While the artillery was firing, Lucy Lee Koxi finally received the command to attack. He impatiently relayed the charge orders to the entire regiment. More than 5,000 soldiers of the 3rd Independent Regiment needed to move within about 200 meters of the enemy's positions within 25 minutes and stand by. They had 5 minutes to rest, and at the moment the bombardment ceased, they would launch a full-force attack on the Orc positions. Chapter 196. The private of the 3rd Infantry Corps, Aero Rakrisha, had never even in his wildest dreams imagined such a horrific scene unfolding before him. It could only be described as cataclysmic. The lowly soldier had no idea about any orbit strike plans from higher ups, he only knew that a meteor shower had streaked across the sky and struck the core area of the high tower ruins in the distance, followed by the earth shattering. Not to mention the scorching wind that blew, the shock wave, the massive noise, at the very least, just the things he saw with his eyes were enough to astonish him. It was as if two large, and many small suns had risen from deep within the ruins of the high tower. Then, the high tower ruins he had grown so familiar with over the past few years had changed beyond recognition. Despite being ruins, there were still landmark buildings. Many of the city's skyscrapers had collapsed, but a considerable number remained in place. The high-rise buildings erected by pre-war technology were meant to stand for centuries, and rightly so. No matter how derelict they looked, they simply would not fall. Many battles around these tall structures of the pre-war era, all those bullets and artillery fire, had not managed to bring them down. Even a 155 mm howitzer, hitting those standing buildings, would only scrape off some surface or further scramble the already haphazard structure inside, but a complete collapse had never happened. But this massive bombardment from the sky not only achieved that, it went overboard. Not only the pre-war skyscraper ruins had collapsed, but in the central area, there were no longer any forests of high buildings to be seen. From Lacroix's viewpoint looking into the depths of the ruins, it was as if some monster had bitten off a huge chunk of the steel jungle, leaving a vast absence. Before he could recover from the shock, a continuous whistling sound came from overhead. He was familiar with the sound, having heard it often over the past month. But he had never heard it this densely. Before he had time to think further, the command of the platoon leader was passed down level by level, the squad leader ordered to move out, and he quickly gathered his thoughts to follow the troops. As he advanced toward the front lines, he felt his body heat up. He couldn't tell if it was due to the rapid marching or the excitement bubbling up from the bottom of his heart. Continuous booming explosions came from the direction he was heading towards. That was the sound of artillery bombardment falling on the Greenskin Orcs' positions. During the advance, he was still nervous, fearing that an artillery shell might come hurling in or a greenskin armed pickup might appear. These things had been their nightmare for some time. But none of that happened. When he and his comrades arrived a mere 100 or 200 meters away from the Greenskin Orcs' positions, he clearly understood why there had been no resistance on the way. The Greenskins had been blown away, what strength did they have left to stop them? Those artillery pieces, those armed pickups, had probably been blown to bits long ago. He only waited there for 5 or 6 minutes, but he had already seen hundreds of shells smash into the positions in front of them. The intense bombardment made his head numb. To be honest, Lacroix was still quite fearful at this position. If those shells deviated slightly, they would land right on their heads, even if they did not hit. Being only 100 or 200 meters away, he could still clearly feel the power of the explosion. Even the officers kept tirelessly warning the soldiers below to not let their chests and abdomens touch the ground while lying in wait, and though it might be uncomfortable, to prop up their bodies. This was to avoid the shock wave coming from the ground, which could damage their internal organs. They stood by in this position for 7 minutes. According to the squad leader, they had arrived a bit earlier than the scheduled time. Lacroix didn't understand these details since he didn't even have a watch. He only knew that now the time had come, it was time to charge. He was still a bit afraid. It wasn't fear of the greenskins, for how many would be left alive after such a bombardment? Even if a good number survived, it was just a matter of shooting it out. He had a gun, and if they got too close, he'd fix bayonets and fight it out. What he feared was the artilleryman behind him having a shaky hand, which would mean his end. But he charged anyway. Crossing the 200 meters, they broke into the greenskins' positions and quickly sought out all potential defensive points where greenskins might exist. Intermittent resistance gunfire emanated. Clearly, not all of the greenskins were dead. In the collapsed houses, in the narrow holes formed by toppled multi-layered reinforced concrete, there still lurked some green Skin Orcs who had survived the artillery strike. As the human soldiers mounted their attack, they emerged from various places, howling as they countercharged. But their numbers were too few. In front of Lacroix, 3 appeared. He and his comrades began shooting immediately. The squads in his platoon were not far apart, over 30 guns aimed at these 3 greenskins, showering them with concentrated fire. The greenskins fired back, but they only managed to get off 2 shots each before they were hit by nearly 100 bullets and killed. As for their last stand, they merely managed to break a soldier's leg. Chapter 197. The soldier with the broken leg had his comrades dragging him back, where the follow-up logistics support would take over and relay him back to the field hospital in the rear. The remaining men continued to advance. The artillery fire from the rear was still ongoing, the intensity had diminished a bit, but the target area of the bombardment shrunk from the full coverage of the green-skinned positions to a smaller scope, roughly covering only about 200 meters in front of the infantry. The coordination of infantry and artillery was such that, after they cleared the area, the artillery barrage would extend another 200 meters forward, and the newly vacant area would be scouted by the infantry as they moved ahead. This process would repeat 4 times until they broke through the enemy positions that stretched about 800 meters wide. Truth be told, the only thing Lacroix was genuinely afraid of during the whole operation was his own gunners having shaky hands. The heavy artillery blasting around 200 meters in front of him was indeed frightful. As for the greenskins, he had seen green-skinned corpses scattered all over the ground, mutilated beyond recognition. Finding an intact body was difficult. Occasionally, a few living ones would pop up, but they were scattered and met with dozens of guns firing at them, posing no real threat. To be honest, apart from the fear brought by his own artillery, Lacroix's greatest feeling was a bit of boredom. Of course, he knew this feeling of his was somewhat absurd. A bit further ahead, he and his comrades entered a ruin with 4 walls. The roof of the building was covered with a resting concrete slab, likely hit by a shell, with smoke still billowing out. There was a 50-50 chance that it was empty, the other 50% was that it contained greenskins mangled beyond human recognition or still alive yet equally disfigured. If they encountered the latter, they would just deliver a few shots to end their lives. Even so, according to tactical protocols, they still had to go in and make sure it was cleared. This time, they ran into an unlikely event. With a loud bang of a gunshot, the first brother to enter had half his face blown open, his helmet was blasted away by the large-caliber greenskin weapon, and his body fell backward violently. Lacroix was second in line. He instinctively took a step back, opening up a position to raise his gun easily. His G9A assault rifle began to wildly sweep the pitch-dark space inside. He couldn't see the target, so he fired blindly. His comrades from the same squad rushed over and, like him, poured bullets inside. Lacroix was the first to empty his magazine. He deftly straightened the bayonet, then, once the others in his squad had ceased fire, he rushed in first. In the darkness, he vaguely saw a monstrous figure taller than himself approaching, with a pungent odor. His mind went blank, but his hands moved in the most standard position, thrusting the bayonet forward. Immediately, he felt a huge resistance, he had struck something. He pushed forward desperately, twisting the rifle. The resistance made him step back a few paces, but it quickly lost its strength and was fiercely pushed down by him. Lacroix fell as well. He felt his clothes were wet, stained with the stench of fresh blood. Suddenly, several comrades from his squad rushed in. Someone pulled him up, while others stabbed at the corpse under him with their bayonets. The greenskin was indeed dead. Upon leaving the narrow bunker, and with the help of light, Lacroix saw that he was indeed in a sorry state, covered in blood. But it seemed all to be greenskin blood. He did not feel injured, only a bit shaky in his arm from overexertion. As he regained his senses, he was amazed that he had actually managed to kill a greenskin with a bayonet. Although the creature had probably been severely wounded from the earlier gunfire and suffered multiple injuries, it was ultimately he who had delivered the killing blow. Looking around, he noticed that along with himself, there were only 6 men left. The one who had entered before him and had his head shot off was the 4th from their squad to die. Today, only 2 had been killed, the other 2 had died over the past half-month, their squad hadn't been replenished with new soldiers. He became more alert, and the previous thoughts of boredom had flown far away. The squad leader came over, patted him on the shoulder, and shouted in his ear, "Good job. But Private, we don't have time to rest now. Move out." The war was still harsh. Li Kexi also felt that war was cruel. The heavy artillery had cleared a wave of enemies for them, especially with such intense fire. The remaining number of the enemy was not much, but during the close quarters clearance, his soldiers still paid a considerable price. Of course, it wasn't to the exaggerated extent of Lacroix's infantry squad, which lost 6 and had 2 wounded, mainly because they were the vanguard and so their plight was somewhat worse. The overall casualty rate for the regiment was around 2%. They had lost about 100 warriors, eliminating over 200 scattered greenskins that emerged. As for the total death count of greenskins in this position, that was harder to estimate. The heavy artillery had been firing for more than an hour, at least 5,000 shells had exploded here, the number of dead greenskins was at least over 500. Of course, this was an estimated figure, many bodies were too mutilated or buried under the rubble to be precisely counted, so it could only be said that the number was much more than 500. Chapter 198. The artillery bombardment had now basically ceased, guessing that the gunners had almost exhausted their shells. However, the target area that their 3rd Infantry Corps needed to conquer had also been cleared by them. 2 composite camps from the 1st Extinguishing Wind Brigade swiftly moved through the breach they had created, followed by each moving south and north to start encircling the green Skin Orcs. The rest of the Allied forces had also begun a full-scale offensive. Leaving 2 battalions to hold the position, severing the connection between the greenskins to the south and north of the front line, while the main force, led by Major Perbuff of the 1st Brigade, 1st Battalion, started maneuvering northward. However, it was the southern part of the greenskin positions, now divided, that ended the battle first. Not many greenskins survived there, especially at the far south, which had been previously overrun by the 7th Garrison Division 4th Regiment. The fortifications were almost entirely destroyed, and although the greenskins recaptured it after the retreat, the quickly rebuilt defences were clearly subpar, and the artillery had nearly wiped out all the greenskins there. Compared to the southern positions, the north theoretically had more troops engaged, with the 3rd Independent Regiment also joining the encirclement of the enemy. But the greenskins that were alive there, especially in large numbers, and more importantly, there was a greenskin leader present. The presence of a powerful leader among the greenskin orcs makes a night and day difference in their performance. Without a leader, they would squabble amongst themselves, unable to form a group, recklessly charging without thinking. With a leader, even though they were still mostly reckless and thoughtless, they at least could act in unison. Roast Axe was such an orc leader, commanding great influence. He was the 2nd in command within the clan, only subordinate to the Big Ripper leader, commanding many strong underlings. He knew that according to the elders, according to Big Ripper's plan, they were about to launch a full assault on those shrimps. Many big booms, along with many big tanks, big cans, were all ready and Big Ripper had even sent him the 2nd largest one to the front line in advance to calm his mind. This was bigger than a murder can, the elders called this thing the Fear Big Can. Even though to operate it, it would require sawing off one's legs and integrating them into the machinery, inserting many tubes into one's brain and spine, never to leave it again for life. But, so what? With such a powerful thing, one could hack, shoot and blast with many barrels more exhilaratingly. No greenskin would want to come out of such a device, right? Once inside the Fear Big Can, Roast Axe was in constant pain and torment, only able to alleviate it by killing. He couldn't wait to lead his boys and slaughter all those shrimps. But Big Ripper kept telling him to endure, endure, endure. Enduring, he endured until the sky-breaking, earth-shattering bombardment came. Where was more support from the big machines? Gone, all of it. What to do now? Up to this point, they were surrounded by shrimps from all directions, and if this continued, even if he and his boys fought bravely, it would all be over. Under his call, at least 400 greenskin orcs gathered around him. He led this team of greenskins to break out towards the east. On this path, they bore a sense of invincibility, slaying anyone who blocked their way, may it be gods or Buddhas. Roast Axe, now encased within the Fear Big Can, stood 4 meters tall, much larger and stronger than an ordinary murder can, and its armor strength had even surpassed the power armor of a star warrior. Bullets fired at him had very little effect. Unable to breach the defense, a group of commanders organized dozens of rocket launchers for a concentrated volley, killing several greenskins, but Roast Axe, who was the main target, took the bombardment head-on with minimal damage. That thing even targeted the commander, charging forward, cutting down any soldiers in its way like chopping melons and slicing vegetables, with multi-barrel autocannons firing, with wheels of sawtooth blades sweeping, dozens of infantry soldiers butchered along the way. The commander tried to retreat in the face of imminent danger but failed to do so, with the instructor killed by the autocannon, and the commander himself bisected at the waist by the sawtooth. The entire battalion was routed, and even that particular breach was difficult to reinforce in the short term. Thankfully, Major Prabhu's battalion had maneuvered into position. But even so, the interception was extremely difficult. Whether it was the Strider V or the home-produced Challenger tanks, they were all at risk of being torn apart in the presence of the Fear Big Can. The autocannons mounted on the armored vehicles had difficulty hitting the Big Can. Despite its wild shape and massive size, its agility was not weak at all, and the gun turrets had less than perfect accuracy. Even with a substantial number of bullets hitting, they merely left small dents on its metallic armor, failing to penetrate. Plainly put, the caliber was insufficient. Even the 76mm tank gun of the Challenger tank seemed inadequate. Mainly, the local artillery technology wasn't up to par, with shell velocity also lacking. Despite the caliber, it struggled to penetrate armor. Of course, the tank's effectiveness was still somewhat better than that of the autocannons. Unless there was a barrage of hundreds of autocannon rounds concentrated on it, or dozens of successful hits from 76mm tank shells, whereby metal fatigue would rupture the armor of the Fear Big Can, there was no dealing with roast axe. On the other hand, he could approach close to armored vehicles, his massive pincers even capable of grasping the vehicle's head, causing deformation. A few seconds of direct fire from the multi-barrel autocannon could breach the armor, killing those inside, and a spray of sparks would fly as the wheel of sawtooth blades cut through the armor plate. Chapter 199. He did it, using various methods. He destroyed 2 armored vehicles, 2 tanks. Infantry pressed forward, again trying to attack with rocket launchers, but could only achieve relatively minor effects, unable to deliver a decisive blow. To annihilate this terrifying steel behemoth, one must either bombard it with enough firepower after making substantial sacrifices, until it is blown apart. If dripping water can wear away stone, then imagine the effect of thousands upon thousands of various bullets and artillery shells smashing into it. But the sacrifice required was too great. Before the Wadoic force field was destroyed, it was uncertain how many people would die and how many combat vehicles would be damaged on our side. Another plan was to blast it with 155mm howitzers. This was a reliable approach. A couple of hits, or even a single direct hit, might well be enough to accomplish the mission of destroying it. However, this plan would also result in significant casualties mainly from friendly fire. But there was no other choice. If they didn't find a way to deal with it, the human troops wouldn't last until the steel beast was destroyed and would be breached, allowing the orcs to break through. Prabhu gritted his teeth, ordered some of the troops to press forward, and at the same time called for an artillery barrage from the rear. Many of the soldiers from his 1st Battalion of the Wind Extinguishing Brigade were within the targeted area. When the artillery came down, many of his brothers would be killed in the blast. His heart bled, but not only could he not allow his warriors to retreat, he strictly ordered them not to fall back. This was trading the lives of soldiers for tactical gains. Let our soldiers pull back. Just then, this sentence echoed in Prabhu's mind. It was the voice of the governor. Prabhu was stunned for a moment, but quickly came to his senses, altered the orders, and had the soldiers fall back. As the armored vehicles and infantry began to retreat, hiding in bunkers, the terrifying steel behemoth was about to give chase. However, suddenly, a strange power caused it to freeze in its tracks. It wasn't completely immobilized, but it was as if it had lost its controller, its massive body momentarily halted. This was Gu Hang's doing. The governor himself had joined the assault team and had arrived on the battlefield. It wasn't that he was particularly concerned about his own safety, this was a battle destined for victory, and as a spiritual energy user, he wasn't lacking self-defense capabilities. In this battle, as long as he didn't wish to die, it was unlikely he would. Meanwhile, his presence not only boosted the troops' morale but also addressed some special issues. Like the orc leader they were currently facing, his spiritual energy abilities played an important role. Gu Hang had no interest in engaging the steel behemoth in a test of pure strength, that would be a foolish move. Although his spiritual energy was not weak, to confront such a mechanical monstrosity of steel was folly. What he controlled was the orc leader inside the iron behemoth itself. Clearly, as formidable as the orc war machine was, it lacked the spiritual energy resistance provided by interstellar warrior-powered armor. Against spiritual energy, this large contraption had no defense. However, the orc leader's Wadoic force field was quite formidable. Gu Heng had to use all his might to attack the part of the soul representing the central nervous system through soul cutting. This was difficult, only slightly easier than killing the soul itself. Gu Heng's strike could only temporarily immobilize it. After about 1 or 2 minutes, it would recover. But, this period was long enough for the 155 mm howitzer shells to arrive from the artillery position in the rear. Chapter 200. The axe-wielding warrior, along with the dreadful iron tank he was piloting, was blown to death by 50 descending 155 mm howitzer shells. The dense barrage smashed down. Just as he regained power, he had no time to escape the blast zone. Even if his armor was extremely strong, it couldn't withstand such intensive artillery bombardment. Of course, in this process, collateral damage was inevitable. Within 2 minutes, quite a few of our soldiers couldn't make it to a safe place in time. Even if they found cover on the spot, being too close to the explosion meant they still couldn't avoid death. But this was a necessary price to pay. Gu Heng's proactive strike merely minimized this cost. Saving 100 or 200 soldiers was, of course, valuable. The death of the axe-wielding warrior also signaled that the green Skin Orcs front, which had been confronting the human forces for over a month, had completely collapsed. Furthermore, with their morale shattered, the greenskins had no path of escape. With human forces encircling them from all sides, even if they could fly or burrow, escape was still no easy feat. And this was precisely Gu Heng's goal. What he wanted was not just a defeat, but an uncompromising annihilation. Although the casualties, on the whole, were not few, with more than 1,000 soldiers likely wounded or killed in the full assault, the victory achieved was at least 4,000 greenskins annihilated. Among the enemies, 70% perished under the initial rain of artillery fire. It was at this time that Gu Heng saw a new change in his event panel. Event: Greenskin Threat. Mysteriously appearing on this planet, the Greenskin Orcs had grown into a formidable threat over the years. But under your leadership, the valiant warriors not only held off the Greenskin Orcs' incursions but, with orbital bombardments, artillery cover, and full-scale assaults, annihilated their main force. Yet, whether it's the intelligence gathered from the front or your own feeling, these Greenskin Orcs seem unusual. They don't appear to be wild orcs independently evolving on Rage Owl Star, nor do they seem like space orcs invading from beyond the stars. Phase 1 Objective, completed. Phase 1 Reward, T5 Level Additional Troop Training Option Beast Slaughter Group, obtained. Phase 2 Objective, Ascertain the cause of the greenskins' rise. Phase 2 Reward, Important Intelligence Data. The reward for the first phase of the Greenskin Threat event had been distributed in the event panel. Gu Heng was now able to see the Beast Slaughter Group training option among the additional troop types on the troop card interface. As long as the unit is T5 or above, by spending some extra grace, they could add some special attack effects against the Greenskin Orcs. As for the Beast Slayer trait, that the 3rd Independent Regiment got for free, it could be counted as part of the rewards for the first phase, saving him 60 points of grace. The second phase, on the other hand, was something Gu Heng intended to do anyway. But he was somewhat intrigued by the reward of so-called important intelligence data. What could it be? He would find out in time. After briefly checking the updated event information, Gu Heng no longer paid attention to it. The situation on the battlefield was still the foremost priority. After collapsing the main resistance of the Greenskin Orcs, the bulk of the troops took a rest on the spot, and at 5 p.m., they unifiedly consumed the dinner supplied by the logistics, rested for another hour and a half, and departed at 6:30 p.m. toward the depths of the tower ruins. This was not considered rash. There were likely still a few greenskins surviving in this area, but they were no longer of significance. It wasn't feasible to completely ignore them, as subsequent forces would still need to fulfill their missions deep within the tower ruins, and logistics supplies also had to be transported through this area, so the security of this place still needed to be safeguarded. Therefore, Gu Heng left behind the 6th and 7th Garrison Divisions, one to the north and one to the south, responsible for continuing to eliminate any possible surviving scattered greenskins within the area and to serve as a reserve force to ensure the safety of the supply line. Let's put aside the mopping up task for a moment, it wasn't difficult anymore. And the main force advancing deeper faced no real difficulties either. The previous orbital bombardment was no joke. Under such a scale of strikes, very few greenskins could have survived. Especially the most crucial targets, the departure positions of the Greenskin offensive forces and their main camp had been the focus of the strikes. Other areas received lighter firepower, but there were inherently fewer greenskins there to begin with. As the troops advanced, indeed they still occasionally encountered some isolated greenskins, but they posed no threat. Of course, for the sake of safety and future progress, every 20 kilometers traveled, one garrison division would still be left behind. While ensuring supply routes, they also had to take on the duty of eliminating the local Skin Orcs. Fast forward to nearly midnight that same day, the troops arrived at the rallying point of the Skin Orcs, which had been reported by the interstellar warriors. According to the latest intelligence before the orbit bombardment, this place was meant to have gathered over 4,000 Skin Orcs and 3 times that number of cannon fodder grunts, along with a significantly larger number of heavy-duty equipment, more sophisticated than anything encountered before. However, now all that was left was a vast crater and a vast expanse of wreckage. In the center of the Greenskin rendezvous lay an immense crater, empty. Atop this massive crater, logically enough to contain thousands of individuals, there was now no trace to be found. Chapter 201. The very definition of obliteration. On the outskirts of the crater, some suspicious debris began to appear. Looking at the scraps, one could roughly guess that they probably belonged to the bodies or equipment pieces of Skin Orcs. But that was just conjecture. Pieces without any discernible shape, stuff that had melted and then cooled down, were all there was to speculate with. Further away, there were parts that could be identified as belonging to something before destruction, like fingers, halves of thighs, and in these areas, the bodies tended to be more concentrated. Even further out, one could see some individual pieces of complete equipment wreckage, such as overturned, charred and tattered trucks, immobilized killing machines, and relatively intact scorched corpses. The Skin Orcs, once boasting with pride and ready to depart to annihilate everything, had suffered a catastrophic blow here. It was uncertain whether any Skin Orcs survived on the fringes of the bombardment zone, but even if there were any, they were certainly few and no doubt they would have already fled. Gu Heng was quite satisfied with the effects of the strike. However, there was one slight unease troubling him: why had the Space Marines not reported the effects of the strike to him before? This was not supposed to happen. The Special Operations Team had marked the targets for the strike more than a dozen hours ago and left the range that could be affected by the orbital strike. They had more than 10 hours to evacuate, which should not have been a problem. Even, there was no need to retreat so far, just maintaining a certain distance and ensuring their own positions were not marked for orbital strike would suffice to avoid fire from space, and naturally, they would be safe. After the orbital strike had ended and the magnetic field for wireless communication stabilized, they had a conversation with Gu Heng, reporting their safety, indicating they were not affected by the orbital bombardment, and upon Gu Heng's request, they went to the 2 most important targets, the assembly area of the Greenskin Army and their headquarters, to investigate the impact of the orbital strike. In all logic, given their distance, they should have been able to report back very quickly. Yet, the reality was the large force that Gu Heng led had already witnessed the situation at the Greenskin Orc assembly area, but the Special Operations Team, which should have reported back by now, had not transmitted any message. It was now midnight, far into the night. Every officer had been involved in a battle since 11 in the morning, continuously pushing through the ruins, clearing out Skin Orcs. For 13 hours, apart from a short rest at lunch, there had been no time for respite, and they were all very tired by now. It also wasn't good to keep the large force moving. He found a communications soldier and sent out a radio communication request to the Phoenix Battle Group. There was no response. His feeling of unease grew. He called Prabhup over and arranged for his forces to move toward the direction of the reported Skin Orc headquarters for reconnaissance at break of dawn the following day, after getting some rest. If they encountered Skin Orcs along the way, they didn't necessarily have to clear them out unless it was convenient. The main mission was to find traces of the Special Operations Team. Gu Heng was quite anxious. Although there were 5 Space Marines in the action team, theoretically, there shouldn't be any major problems, but during the conflict with the primordial Wrath Owl sect, they had lost a Space Marine, not to mention fighting Skin Orcs. Especially since these Skin Orcs seemed slightly different from the wild ones that developed independently from spores. Read the latest stories on MVLMP year. Wild Skin Orcs and Space Greenskins were both greenskins, with not much difference from physical structure to social form, except that the latter developed more robustly, with a higher level of technology, powerful orc warlords, and even an orc clan overlord. The most terrifying orc disaster in the legends occurred 7,000 years ago, nearly destroying the entire human empire. However, excluding that kind of powerful space orc clan, the ones that developed independently on certain planets without becoming a galactic-scale threat were called wild orcs. The process of green skin infection spreading to another planet is difficult to trace. During one interstellar voyage, invisible green skin spores on some cargo might be taken aboard a spaceship. As the cargo is unloaded and lands on the ground, or is blown away by the wind and finds a suitable environment, it begins to take root and blossom, producing the first skug beast. This ferocious little beast, in its hunting, fighting, when injured, during excretion, or upon death, secretions, the splitting spores give rise to more skug beasts, impish critters, and eventually orc juveniles. Generally, when the green skin ecosystem on a planet has not fully unfolded, the greenskins exist in a primitive tribal state. They have neither technology to speak of nor any sort of organizational structure. They are essentially just a group of wild beasts with relatively high intelligence. They will fight each other, continuously struggling for power. After all, fighting is in the nature of green skin orcs, and it doesn't really matter to them whether their opponents are of the same tribe or not. Through the battles, they will select a green skin chief, who becomes the leader of the tribe. The greenskins forming the tribe will start fighting against anything nearby under the chief's leadership. If they can't find opponents, they will split and then start fighting themselves. Chapter 202. During this process, their numbers would slowly spiral upwards. Many greenskin orcs would die in internal conflicts, but despite fluctuations, the overall population continued to grow. At the same time, as more battles were fought and more orcs were present, so their so-called Waaic force field became increasingly potent. This force field was intricately related to spiritual energy, yet not quite the same. Akin to some kind of idealist technology, it would make their tribal strength grow stronger, and their technology would inexplicably advance. Various weapons and equipment devised by the orcs themselves and usable only by them would one day enable them to embark on a journey to the Star Sea. Of course, without external interference, this process would be incredibly lengthy. However, with external forces at play, such as if they consumed enough brains from other species or witnessed sufficient warfare technology from humans or other intelligent races, then the sparked goblin technicians, sly young orc tech geniuses, and various other technically adept greenskins would rapidly accelerate the process. By this standard, in the ruins of Rage Owl Star's tower, the orc clan that numbered merely in the tens of thousands shouldn't have developed killer cans or terrify iron tanks. They had guns, they had thermal weapons, and that could be deemed as fast enough progress. Similarly, the reports from Rubbish Town in the past never mentioned large-scale wars launched among substantial greenskin factions. This isn't quite consistent with the situation of wild greenskins. But it's even less equivalent to spacefaring greenskins. If a greenskin tribe capable of crossing the Star Sea should set its eyes on Rage Owl Star, then it's time to call it a night, for they would be unstoppable. The appearance of the greenskin orcs at the ruins of Rage Owl Star was indeed an exceptional case. It could also be that humanity's research on the ecology of greenskin orcs was still inadequate, something that even the knowledge that Gu Hang had frantically been catching up on lately failed to elucidate. For this very reason, he felt concerned about the current situation of the Special Operations Team. With such an unusually distinct greenskin orc tribe, who could know whether an incident could arise that could catch even the Star Warriors off guard? The Emperor's Death Angels often lived up to their demi-godly reputation, but amidst the combat against the numerous ghouls and demons of the universe, sometimes they would die in droves. Greenskins were one of those many ghouls and demons. It wasn't that Gu Hang was a jinx, but the Special Operations Team really did run into major trouble. Setting the clock back to 11 in the morning, after the orbital strike hit, they indeed were unharmed. They patiently waited for some time. After the lingering effects of the bombardment dissipated and radio communications were restored, they reported back to the governor that they were safe. Then, following the orders of the governor, they made their way to the site of the orbital bombardment. The primary investigation site was actually the gathering place and the main base of the greenskin orcs. They went to the main base first. There, the scene was almost identical to where they set out from, also a huge crater with surrounding buildings completely leveled. The difference lay in the massacre here, where there were many more goblin sages and orc artisans among the wreckage of greenskin structures. That was about it. They wandered around the area of the strike, assessing the effects of the assault, while also keeping an eye out for any survivors nearby. The greenskin armory confirmed destroyed. Greenskin camp confirmed destroyed. 3 greenskin spawning farms confirmed destroyed. And it has to be said, greenskins were terrifyingly tenacious. Even an apocalyptic level of bombardment that which was more intense than a nuclear strike couldn't take down those who were farther from the blast center, especially those who, at the time of the bombardment, happened to be in more robust shelters. Thankfully, their numbers were not many, and they were scattered. Without being detected, they didn't waste time exterminating them. Of course, if it was convenient, they'd take them down. Due to the nature of green skin orcs, as long as their leader was killed in the bombardment and if none of the surviving orcs stepped up as a leader, they would revert to intelligent beasts, acting solely on instinct and fighting among themselves until a new leader emerged. During this time, they were at their weakest. If humans seized this opportunity, they could completely wipe them out. Then, with thorough cleaning of every inch of land the orcs had tread upon, the orc crisis could be considered resolved. Of course, due to their tenacity and spore-based propagation, one must never let their guard down regarding the orc threat. For a long time to come, this planet must remain vigilant, keep monitoring the places once afflicted by the green skin calamity, and periodically eradicate any suspicious plant life. But as long as they didn't grow complacent and carried out the Empire's regulations diligently, any problems that did arise would be minor, mostly nipped in the bud before they could escalate into a major crisis. However, just as they were relaxing a bit, a roar reached them from afar. Startled at first, they quickly realized it probably wasn't because their presence had been detected. It sounded more like a greenskin orc rallying its comrades with a battle cry. Chapter 203. Communications were basically by yelling, a bit amusing, but no one could muster a laugh now. The emergence of this situation meant that in this area, there still existed an orc leader with considerable appeal. And it was unlikely that this leader had just emerged from a recent fight. On one hand, such things didn't happen so quickly, on the other hand, a newly risen boss wouldn't have this kind of charisma. So, the answer seemed obvious: under the previous, formidable orbital bombardment, a powerful leader of the greenskin orcs had not perished. Nobody knew whether it was sheer luck, being outside the core area of the bombing, or some other reason, but clearly, it was not good news. They decided to go and check the situation out. If a large number of greenskin orcs had already gathered under its call, then it was best to report the news to the governor and then assign someone to monitor the situation. But if the number of gathered greenskins was still small, Maddens and the other 4-star warriors planned to take action and kill that greenskin leader. Decapitation tactics were among the most effective strategies against greenskin orcs. A Grand Waik, even if it spanned across Star Sea during a campaign, needed a strong orc warlord to organize and initiate it. Only a sufficiently powerful leader could unite the greenskins. But likewise, as soon as their leader was killed, the remaining greenskins would quickly disperse, and they normally had to fight among themselves until more than half were dead. They had no concept of uniting against a common enemy to save their race from extinction. Even in a specific battle, the death of a squad leader could greatly shake the entire squad. The death of a commanding leader during a campaign could lead the entire fight toward collapse. When facing greenskins, finding the biggest, greenest, and strongest one and then slaughtering it was the best approach. So, who was best suited for such a task on the battlefield? Of course, it was the Star Warriors. In past wars, whenever the Phoenix fought against greenskins, they regularly carried out similar missions 5 or 6, or even 7 or 8, times in a single campaign. Now, they were simply revisiting an old craft. Even the Star Warriors felt a touch of nostalgia. However, when they silently arrived on the scene and saw the greenskins that had gathered there, they dismissed the idea of a surprise attack. The number was greater than they had anticipated. There were easily more than 1,000 orc youngsters. And it wasn't just light infantry, there were battle trucks and killer cans, at least 50 pieces accounted for among various kinds of heavy equipment. Moreover, stray greenskins were continuously converging at the location. The number gathered surprised even Maddens. Why were there so many? While discussing, they came up with a plausible conjecture. It was possible that this orc leader had been leading the troops he gathered toward the rally point. Then the orbital bombardment happened en route. The most important targets of the bombardment were the main camp and the rally point, which suffered the most violent, unavoidable strikes, but they, being halfway between the two, were fortunate enough to narrowly escape the disaster. There were certainly many greenskins who had died, and from what Maddens and his team could see, many of the orcs bore injuries. After all, this round of orbital bombardment didn't consist of just 2 great macro cannons, there were also 20 smaller colossal cannons and hundreds of orbital missiles raining down everywhere, and those devices were extremely lethal. But overall, over 1,000 greenskins had survived. Executing the decapitation tactics had become difficult. It wasn't just the large number of enemies that was the issue, but the greenskin orc leader itself warranted attention. It was huge. It was very green. Chapter 204. If there had been a reliable ally force drawing attention at the front, Phoenix's 5 starfighters might have had a chance at success. But at the moment, the only allies by their side were the 28 soldiers of Storm Squad. Although they were also elite, asking them, all 28 of them, to face off against an enemy 50 times their number and distract them for the starfighters, that was impossible. Even if they were all killed, it couldn't be done. Moreover, even if they could draw the enemy's attention at the front, launching a successful decapitation strike would be very difficult. The greenskin leader looked very strong. He was clad in heavy-duty equipment, his entire stature reaching up to 3 meters. His heat weapons and cold arms, after modifications, seemed all exaggerated. His heavy armor was certainly not something that could be easily broken through. Maddens and his team were experienced and well-informed, and after evaluating the monster's strength, they concluded that not even a veteran starfighter could take it down in a one-on-one fight. Only the 5 of them, attacking simultaneously, could ensure a swift, no-hassle kill. But any minor issue in the process or delay, and with the constant reinforcement of greenskins, they might get trapped and unable to come out. Forget it, forget it. Focus on surveillance, and wait for Mr. Gu to arrive with the main forces. By then, with a large army pressing forward fully, it would be much easier for the 5 of them to make a move in the chaos of battle. There was no need to be adventurous now. However, as they dampened their efforts, the greenskins seemed to have discovered them. The conspicuous orc leader cast his gaze towards their hiding place from afar. Maddens furrowed his brows. Why were we discovered? He was truly perplexed. Had his senses deteriorated from not having fought against the greenskins for a while? But upon careful consideration, their actions seemed flawless, and the elites of Storm Squad also did a good job. Logically, they shouldn't have been so easily detected. I don't know how they discovered us, said Schneider, but I do know we're in trouble. Get ready for combat, combat my ass. 30 men against 1,000 well-equipped orcs led by a boss was a suicide mission. While the distance between both sides was still great, running away was the most sensible option. However, during their escape, they soon realized what had revealed their position. It was, of course, another greenskin orc, standing right beside the orc boss. His hunched figure did not look tall, nor was it equipped with any exaggerated weapons, it looked quite ordinary. The unusual part was the silver-grey metal rod in his hand, which was not originally a product of greenskin technology. However, on its upper part, it was decorated with beast teeth, multicolored paint, and filled with the style of the greenskin orcs. The old orc pointed his scepter towards the location of the starfighters. An intuition of imminent danger made them immediately start to dodge. Just then, a red laser beam shot towards them. The starfighters were unharmed, but the beam penetrated the bodies of 2 Storm Squad soldiers. The bulletproof alloy steel plates beneath their uniforms barely served any purpose, both soldiers had fist-sized, penetrating wounds burned through them. The beam, after passing through the 2 men, extended far into the distance until it hit a distant ruined wall and disappeared from sight. The 2 soldiers collapsed to the ground, weakly convulsing and struggling on the earth. They weren't dead yet, but death was certain. No one could save them, and during a retreat, it was impossible to bring along 2 wounded who would inevitably die within minutes. This couldn't really be considered abandoning comrades, but morale inevitably dropped during the escape. Even without the burden, their escape was far from smooth. The hunched old orc continually released beams from his hand, firing every few minutes. The highly penetrating energy beam was something not even the starfighters could ignore. A direct hit by 2 beams would damage the power armor, 3 could be fatal. Even without hitting the same spot, 2 hits would weaken the armor's overall defense due to structural changes, allowing the third to be deadly. Fortunately, the old orc's attack range was extremely far, still deadly even over 2,000 meters away. However, he lacked high magnification aiming scopes and the ability to aim shots. Although the beam didn't suffer from trajectory deviation over long distances, if he couldn't aim properly it was all for naught. The reason the first shot was fatal was because the team had not had the chance to fully disperse their formation, and they were too close to each other. A random shot was likely to hit, which resulted in the fatal blows to the 2 Storm Squad soldiers. Now, as they were on the move and had dispersed their formation further, hitting them was not so easy. Furthermore, they weren't without the means to fight back. Explosive guns, the electromagnetic rifles in the hands of Storm Corps, had the capability to kill enemies at a distance of 2,000 meters. Although there would be significant attenuation, a hit would still be lethal. T3 class soldiers were already reliable in shooting accuracy, not to mention the starfighters who could not be evaluated simply by the T rating, and even had built-in combat assistance systems in their power armor to help them aim and shoot more accurately. Chapter 205. Even though their firearms were not the sniper models specially designed for long-range kills, they could still pose a threat to the old orc at a distance of 2 kilometers. However, they did not succeed in shooting it dead, killing only a few unlucky greenskins who got in the way. The old orc was quite cunning, too. Upon realizing he had become a target, he didn't stubbornly exchange fire with the interstellar warriors of the Storm Corps. Instead, he took cover behind the orc warlord. That was a large shield, even a grenade rifle couldn't damage the armor on him at a distance of 2 kilometers, let alone harm the old orc hiding behind him. But similarly, while taking cover might have spared him from being killed by grenade rifles or electromagnetic rifles, he also couldn't continue to pose a threat to the fleeing humans. Nevertheless, the situation for the human side was hardly any better. A considerable part of the greenskin army had started to move. Armored trucks and killer cans were chasing them. Even the orc warlord had personally joined the fray. Bullets were fired at them over a 2-kilometer gap relentlessly. The greenskins' shoddy firearms made a racket, but their bullets couldn't even travel the 2-kilometer distance, falling to the ground halfway, not to mention having any accuracy. But the greenskins were not left without weapons that could threaten them at this distance. Setting aside the tin barrel cannons, which lacked precision and were like using a cannon to swat a mosquito and actually had to hit, the heavy machine guns on the armed trucks and the multi-barrel autocannon mounted on the killer cans could still be threatening beyond 2 kilometers. The precision of the greenskin orcs' weapons was hard to predict, but when bullets came flying in a dense stream, as long as the general direction was correct, the bullets would still be lethal at 2 kilometers. With their vast numbers, even random shots were threatening enough. Members of the Storm Squad kept falling during the retreat. At this moment, turning around to return fire was not particularly useful. They could neither kill all the enemies nor fend them off. They could only keep running. Of course, escape was actually impossible. If the interstellar warriors ran at full speed, they might have a chance, but the elite soldiers of the Storm Squad were certain to be caught. But even for the interstellar warriors, the chance of escape was slim. After all, running at full speed meant exposing their backs to the enemy, and if there was one place where the mecha were weakest, it was definitely the back. To die with one's back to the enemy was undoubtedly a great disgrace for an interstellar warrior. And even if they decided to forsake honor and abandon their comrades to flee with all their might to preserve the fire of the battle group, the outcome might not be any better. Until they had completely left the enemy's attack range and evaded pursuit, it was likely that someone among them would fall, paying who knows how many lives in order to escape, with no chance to recover their genetic seeds. Now, although they were still retreating, sometimes they faced the enemy while firing and moving backward, and other times they took shelter behind a slope or the ruins of a building, temporarily stopping the bullets from hitting them. Retreating in such a manner, they obviously couldn't run fast. On the contrary, even if the path was rugged, those armed trucks with their 6 wheels were at least mobile. Even if some areas were inaccessible to wheels and they had to detour, they wouldn't slow down much. As for the killer cans, those walking mecha, there were even fewer issues. Maddens and Schneider combined their efforts to take down a killer can with concentrated fire from their grenade rifles at a distance of over 1,000 meters, but that hardly quenched their thirst. While fighting and retreating, they could only do their utmost to delay the enemy's pursuit. They also couldn't run in a straight line. They had to avoid incoming fire and also be on guard not to be outflanked by the armed trucks taking detours. They were fully aware that being caught up to was now inevitable. But that didn't mean they were utterly hopeless. Although they didn't speak to each other, Maddens believed that his comrades probably shared his thoughts. They were looking for a defensible location to hold out until reinforcements arrived. Although they didn't know how long they would have to wait, this option seemed more reliable than running. Of course, they also had to be prepared for the worst-case scenario, total annihilation. But what of it? War is like that. Especially when facing an orc clan that had surpassed the level of ordinary wild greenskins who knew whether a mishap or a victory would come first. Along the way, they indeed found some locations conducive to defense. There were several large, sturdy buildings with 3 or 4 stories. Even though this place was no longer the central target zone for orbital strikes, those buildings had stood for a century without collapsing and had weathered the quake-like aftershocks of near-orbital bombardment without falling. This proved that the pre-war structures were sufficiently robust. Taking refuge in the high-rise buildings and fighting inside, the armed trucks would struggle to enter, and the killer cans would find movement difficult. They would only need to defend a section in front of them and wouldn't have to face bullets coming from all directions as in an open field. But those high-rises were still not the best choice. Chapter 206. They were worried that those greenskins, if they made use of explosives in a targeted manner, would be able to blow up their location, and they might face attacks from all sides, especially if the enemy used ladders to climb up. Maddens and his group were still searching for a more suitable location to hold their ground. Despite no one knowing whether the last abandoned high-rise, which seemed defensible, was the best spot they could find next, or if the next would be even worse, they had to keep searching in order to maximize their defensive advantage. This time, the Emperor seemed to have heard their loyal prayers, and their luck suddenly changed for the better. A soldier discovered an underground space amidst the ruins of a building. As for defending, this kind of basement was well suited. Although there was still the danger of collapse, if it was deep and sturdy enough, the risk of being buried would be smaller than having a high-rise blown up. And as for other aspects, it was nearly all advantages. There was only one entrance, which made it easy to defend. The inner space was more restricted, reducing the number of enemies they would face, preventing the enemy from leveraging their numerical superiority. In such limited space, not even a killing jar would fit, which was even better. If worst came to worst, they could seal the entrance. Though they wouldn't be able to get out themselves, at least there would be no worries about being overtaken for a significant time. After staying a day, when Mr. Gu's army arrived, the outside might be much safer, and they could dig themselves out in power armor with their bare hands, maybe even make their way out in a few days. In any case, it was better than waiting to die. The only concern was whether the vertical depth of the underground space was sufficient. If it was just a small basement, once they entered and enemies rushed in, getting trapped with no room to maneuver would also be very dangerous. However, just by briefly passing by the underground entrance, Maddens dismissed this concern. This wasn't any kind of basement, it was an underground research facility. You could tell just by the thick, solid circular iron door at the entrance. In the past, this iron door must have been power-driven, as it would have been impossible to close or open by human strength alone. Now, though, it was merely ajar, its power mechanism long ineffective. Without any room for hesitation, Maddens chose to enter. 5 interstellar warriors and 21 surviving soldiers from the Storm Squad stepped into the underground space. At Maddens' signal, a squad of elite soldiers ventured deeper to explore. They needed to understand the layout, to know where to fall back if the fighting turned unfavorable. Moreover, they also needed to ascertain if there were other entrances or exits, for a possible escape or to guard, preventing the greenskins from discovering them and attacking from behind. The rest remained about 20 meters inside the entrance, hurriedly gathering any materials they could find: broken bricks, building materials, in short, quickly constructing a defensive position. They were to hold the entrance, delay the enemy as long as possible, and inflict casualties. But they didn't have much time at all. Only 2 minutes later, enemies appeared at the entrance. It was just a few greenskins, apparently dismounted from an armored truck that couldn't pass through. No sooner had they shown their heads than they were mercilessly killed. Within the 30-meter range of the entrance, the interstellar warriors and elite soldiers of the Storm Squad were accurate with their shots. What was critical was that their weapons were far from weak compared to the G9 series rifles. Bomb guns could kill greenskin brats with one shot, and electromagnetic rifles only took a few more. In other words, if those greenskins only tried to storm in using infantry, they were likely to die without capturing the place. The interstellar warriors each had nearly 300 rounds, the Storm Squad soldiers had at least 180 rounds each. Used sparingly and accurately, they might be able to hold on. The greenskin orcs understood this point as well, even if they didn't. After the killing jars couldn't make it through, and they had gathered metal barrel cannons to bombard the entrance, with 20 lads rushing in and none coming out alive, it became clear. They stopped sending more men to die, which gave Maddens and the others a chance to catch their breath. But he also knew this was the calm before the storm. It was deep into the night, yet they dared not rest. They attempted to contact Mr. Gu, but the wireless communication had been cut off. It was likely that the greenskins had the technology to block communication signals. In any case, they didn't have many options now. They had to hold on with the natural advantage of the location. The orc elder Gorgon glared angrily at the flesh-tearing figure before him, much stronger and larger than himself, wishing he could kill him. But that was not an option. He was no longer a match for the flesh-tearer. He couldn't even stand by and watch the flesh-tearer go to his death. He knew those hiding were cans. In his distant memory, He had seen these cans before, and they killed orc youngsters as easily as orcs slaughtered little devils. The flesh-tearer was already the strongest warrior in the tribe, but according to his old memories, he judged that if the flesh-tearer charged in recklessly, he might kill 1 or 2 cans, but he would ultimately die there. The flesh-tearer couldn't die. If he did, the more than 1,000 youngsters that had just been regrouped would immediately plunge back into collapse. Below him were 5 or 6 orc chiefs of equal rank, all following the flesh-tearer because he was stronger and greener. If the flesh-tearer died, a bloody struggle would undoubtedly ensue among them, and they would fight with their followers, not caring about anything else until only one remained. Chapter 207. If it were usual times, Gorgon wouldn't mind these things, but not now. He still needed the clan to continue existing. He could only plead earnestly once more, "Why won't you listen to me? When have I ever deceived you? Nothing will do. Tearing flesh was still so stubborn, I must kill all those shrimp. I'll only leave after I've killed them all. All my boys are dead, the munitions factory is gone, the farm is gone, but I haven't personally killed a single shrimp. This is absolutely unacceptable. But we'll all die here." Gorgon growled, "Those shrimp have already killed Broil Axe, wiped out all the boys in front, and they are coming to kill us. We must leave now, this isn't the time to fight. Once we have more boys, more big guns, then we'll come back and kill these shrimp." Pausing for a moment, the orc elder Gorgon pointed to the barely visible tunnel entrance in the dark night, continuing, "Years ago, I was dug out from there, and after I personally killed the few shrimp who had dug me out, I carefully inspected the place. It's very sturdy, only accessible from the front entrance, but with those canned goods guarding it, even you couldn't break through." At this point, Gorgon suddenly fell silent. He saw that Tearing Flesh's eyes filled with brutality were staring at him. It was as if he had made a mistake. He had just told the strongest boss in the tribe, "You can't do it." And this was something most orc bosses would never believe. The enormous Tearing Flesh looked down at the decrepit Gorgon. Tearing Flesh said, "I'm the boss, I don't have to listen to you. I'm the biggest in the tribe, the greenest, there's nothing I can't kill." With that, his mechanized arm grasped Gorgon's throat, lifting his frail body up. "You're too old, too weak, I've had enough of your words. I'll keep your head and let you watch with your own eyes how I tear those shrimp to pieces." Gorgon hissed as if he wanted to say something, but ultimately couldn't utter a word. Tearing Flesh didn't want to listen to him anymore, his mechanized arm just tightened, twisting Gorgon's throat. The light in Gorgon's eyes quickly faded. In that moment, he remembered many things. He was originally just an ordinary craftsman boy from the Iron Tooth clan. He was born on a warm planet where his clan had completely conquered the place, and the remaining shrimp were corralled as food, as slaves, as tools of amusement. Then, the shrimp came. The clan's battleship was destroyed, lots of canned goods fell from the sky, together with many shrimp, they raided and destroyed the planet's anti-orbit cannon. Then using incessant artillery fire, they purged the entire planet again and again. All the green Skin Orcs he knew died, and he was lucky to survive. But afterwards, he was captured. And after being transferred around, he ended up here, locked in that underground research facility nearby, for who knows how many years. He was dissected, but the tenacious life force of the green Skin Orcs allowed him to survive time and again. After simple stitching, he was injected with all sorts of strange liquids, used as a guinea pig for various experiments. But suddenly one day, everything stopped. He was stuffed into a cold storage unit, it was very cold, and he soon lost consciousness. When he regained consciousness, there were a few ragged shrimp standing in front of him. They had never seen a creature like himself, but once he had regained his strength, he broke out of the glass sarcophagus that held him and slaughtered all those shrimp. But he had forgotten many things, how to make cannons, how to make killer cans, only recently had he started to remember these. Then, he walked out and encountered many monsters. He fought those beasts, hunted them for food, and in the process, he bled. Wherever his blood was shed, within a year, some green plants started to grow, skug beasts, farts, and other green Skin Orcs gradually began to emerge. He was happy, he wasn't alone anymore. There were people to fight with, to accompany him in battle. He still remembered, among the new lads that appeared, there was one he fancied most, called Ripper. The lad didn't let him down and became the first leader. Together they gathered all the lads, and Gorgon, following the memory of the clan from the past, established their own tribe and gave it the same name as before Iron Tooth clan. Over the years, the tribe's numbers kept growing, they began to expand outward until they encountered many tiny shrimps. He was delighted, for fighting with shrimps was the most fun. As they fought, the tribe would grow stronger. The lads went to battle to die, and then those who survived grew bigger, greener, even the dead would sprout more green skin orcs, until there were more and more of them, stronger and stronger, and then Ripper could bring about a great Wadak, and the Iron Tooth clan would sweep across the entire planet, turning it into a place just like the one he was born on. A little over a month ago, tougher shrimps appeared. Gorgon was not worried, on the contrary, he was even more excited. Amidst the intense battles, the Wadak force field grew denser, Ripper grew bigger, and as he reveled in it, he even recalled many technologies he had once forgotten, making killing cans, terror iron cans, and even crafting a set of warlord armor for Ripper. Only, why did something like what destroyed the Iron Tooth clan before begin to fall from the sky again? Gorgon couldn't fathom it. If only we could make big ships that fly outside the planet too. This was his last thought. Content from MVLMP year. And the last sound he heard was Ripper's roar of fury. Then, his consciousness faded into darkness. Maddens and Schneider wore solemn expressions when they saw Ripper. At such close range, they could finally confirm that this was an orc warlord. From their past combat experience, they clearly understood the level of strength this creature could possess. Average interstellar warriors couldn't last 3 blows in front of an orc warlord. To defeat one in a duel, at least a squad champion was needed. And at this moment, with the arrival of this orc warlord, countless green skin orcs began to swarm in, too numerous to count in the moment, restricted only by the narrow entrance that prevented them all from squeezing through at once. Maddens and Schneider exchanged a glance, and what they saw in each other's eyes was not panic, but excitement. Opportunity had come. They weren't afraid of the orc warlord's appearance, because its appearance meant a great opportunity. To kill an orc warlord required the intervention of a squad champion. Isn't that a coincidence? Squad champions, there are 2 right here. Chapter 208. Interstellar warriors, of course, have their strengths and weaknesses. Apart from weapons, power armor models, and other hardware configurations, an individual's strength cannot be overlooked. Veteran soldiers can take on 2, even 3 new soldiers without much trouble. The champion of a platoon is the strongest among 100 warriors. Maddens and his companion Schneider both were such champions. Of course, theoretically, the strongest member of a battle group should be the group's champion or its leader, but Maddens had been temporarily promoted after the battle group was nearly annihilated. His true strength was at the level of a platoon champion. Even so, he had a chance against an orc warlord. If it were a warlord who had control over an entire planet, that might be very difficult, but the one at hand was far from that level. Moreover, his armor, while looking fierce, had probably not yet reached the level equivalent to the Terminator model armor among interstellar warriors, so there was a chance of victory. The issue now was to create an opportunity for a one-on-one combat. This was difficult, but not entirely impossible. Many greenskins had surged in, and the entrance became very crowded. The orc warlord, along with his mechanically enhanced armor, was only a little smaller than a killing can, and was quite squeezed in the underground entrance corridor. Behind and in front of him were more killing cans streaming in as well. Interstellar warriors, the soldiers of the Storm Corps, were already firing with all their might. There was no need to worry too much about accuracy, the entrance was clogged with greenskins, and even a blind man, holding his gun and firing towards their roar, could hit the enemy accurately. However, as this continued, a lot of greenskins died, but their ammunition was running out rapidly. Especially after the frontline greenskins were almost dead, what they faced now were killing cans that nearly blocked the entrance solidly, having to bend their mechanical knees, slowly and clumsily moving forward. If killing cans wanted to come in, that meant pure brute forcing. Their body size was only slightly smaller than the height and width of the entrance. They could squeeze in, but they couldn't use their limbs freely at all. Especially since there were many greenskin youngsters following them, if they raised their multi-barrel autocannons to open fire, it's difficult to say how many human soldiers they could kill. But surely not many greenskins standing in front of it would survive. But, do greenskins care about such things? The first one to open fire was not the squeezing killing cans, but the flesh rippers. They struggled to find a gap behind the killing cans to thrust their large guns out and then opened fire towards the front. The killing can, squeezed and uncomfortable, was hit by the blaster gun and in agony, also went berserk and followed with fire from its multi-barrel cannon. Under the intense firepower, neither the interstellar warriors nor the elite of the Storm Corps could risk poking their heads out too close. If the helmet of a power armor was hit by large caliber autocannon at a distance of 20 to 30 meters in rapid succession, it would still get blown off. They could only hunker down. Fortunately, cover made from various metal scrap and rubble was not so easily destroyed. But even so, they eventually chose to abandon this position. The killing kin, straining to reach their previous location, forcefully pushed some obstacles aside, finally freeing up some space for movement. However, the next moment, a violent explosion occurred right there. The thick red light rolled over, and the killing kin was immediately immobilized. Ordinary explosives, of course, would not easily destroy a killing kin. But if it were the thermite grenades commonly used by the interstellar warriors, that would be a different story. The metal-built body of the killing kin, hit by a thermite grenade hidden beside the obstacles and hard to spot, was blown into two pieces. The instantly elevated extreme temperature was unbearable even for armored metal. In an instant, the armor plates began to melt and fray. If the thermite grenade had been a bit larger, turning the killing kin into molten iron was also a possibility. Of course, that would have been somewhat overkill. The current extent was enough to induce its destruction. Not only did the armored body lose its ability to fight, the shaved-off imp inside, with limbs removed and tubes plugged into its brain, was already scorched to death. This mini thermite grenade was one of the remaining supplies of the battle group. Similar disposable equipment was still available, but the more they used, the less they had, and it was impossible to resupply on the god-forsaken Rage Owl Star. Yet, the interstellar warriors couldn't afford to grieve their losses. High-value equipment was meant to be used at times like this. Moreover, frankly, the most precious thing in the Phoenix battle group was the lives of its warriors. In their minds, they counted the time. The extremely high temperature from the thermite bomb would not last long. With rapid decay, the interstellar warriors knew exactly that after 6.72 seconds, the temperature would no longer be able to penetrate the power armor they wore and cause any harm. And that was precisely their moment to act. 5 interstellar warriors struck simultaneously at that time. 3 stood firm, their blaster guns already switched from accurate single-shot mode to full-speed firing mode. The last full magazine, loaded in advance, poured out countless bombs in an extremely short span of time. These bombs, almost all of them, went past the destroyed killing kin, hammering towards the orc warlord behind it. Chapter 209. Aside from the 3 of them, with Schneider in the front and Maddens a bit behind on the flank, the 2 former champions of the Phoenix battle group, now the strongest individuals in hand-to-hand combat within the battalion, sprinted towards the orc warlord. Their speed burst to an extreme in an instant, following the bombs, as they charged at the orc warlord. Nearly all the bombs hit the orc warlord. His ultra-heavy armor, which not even a space warrior's grenade gun could penetrate, failed to inflict direct damage on the orc chief behind. Yet, with dozens, if not hundreds of bombs, the diamond-tipped projectiles clinking against it unrelentingly, he still felt a significant impact. Not to mention, the bombs would explode a second time, causing additional damage. After nearly 100 miniature explosions, even the toughest flesh and thickest armor could not help but become dizzy and uncontrollably staggered backward. During this time, his body, far stronger than that of an average space warrior, was still capable of counterattacking at the critical moment. He struggled to lift his spear and fired forward without aiming. In a split second, about a dozen large-caliber bullets fired off. The power of this weapon's caliber was certainly no less formidable than that of the grenade guns in the hands of the space warriors. More crucially, even though he didn't aim, the narrow terrain was fair to everyone. The space warriors were not small in stature either. 2/3 of the bullets still hit their targets. Schneider took 4 hits, with his thick, curved shoulder armor deflecting 3, but 1 still penetrated where the shoulder met the chest armor. There was armor there too, of course, but it was relatively weak and the bullet struck at a good angle. This shot injured Schneider. But his stride only faltered for a moment, then he continued to rush forward without any reduction in speed. Behind the 2 men, one of the most unlucky brothers in arms took 2 shots to the helmet. He grunted and fell to the ground. 3 or 4 men from the Storm Corps tried to pull the fallen warrior back but failed to succeed. Even with their strength enhanced to T3 level, far surpassing that of an ordinary person, 3 or 4 men could not hope to drag a fully armed space warrior. At this moment, Maddens and Schneider had both reached the front of the orc warlord. Schneider took a slight leap, raising his striking position, and his combat knife accurately stabbed into a fissure where the orc's armor joined. It pierced through. Schneider could hear the orc warlord let out a deep roar of pain, evidently hurt, and his body was even brought to the ground by the force of Schneider's thrust. But this only incited the orc's ferocity. His metal-coated arm bent inward, and the autocannon mounted on his wrist aimed at Schneider. With one more pull of the trigger, a storm-like barrage from the autocannon would unleash countless rounds in an instant, all of which would hit Schneider at close range. Even with his powered armor, he could not avoid serious injury. But at that moment, Maddens arrived. His chainsword struck down hard from the other side, hitting a weak joint on the arm, with the chainsaw's power turned up to the maximum, sparks flying. He felt a massive resistance but gritted his teeth, pressing down hard with the chainsword. A moment later, the gun-mounted hand was severed. Schneider was somewhat unsatisfied. Maddens indeed saved him, but in his view, this was also a wasted opportunity. If Maddens had chosen a more lethal spot, it might have been possible to kill this formidable foe directly. Although he would pay for it with serious injury or even death, the calculation under his cold combat will deemed it still worthwhile. However, Schneider said nothing about it, not because his life was saved, but because at this moment in the fight, the slightest change could be the difference between life or death. The orc warlord had only lost an arm, he wasn't dead yet. Without his spear, the brute still had a massive cleaver welded to his other hand. The great sword suddenly slashed toward Schneider, and Schneider freed one hand to seize its arm, wrestling with it, while his other hand tightly gripped the dagger plunged into his battle armor, drawing it outward along the trajectory of force, aiming to enlarge the wound, hoping to reach vital organs. At the same time, Maddens, who had lopped off the hand of the orc warlord and was covered in blood inside his helmet, lifted the chainsaw once more. This time, he aimed for the neck, the fleshy part. The gap between his heavy helmet and his breastplate was the best point of entry. However, the entire battle process, though extremely swift, did have its delays. When the massive body of the orc warlord fell, the enemies who had been blocked behind had a clear line of fire to launch their attack on the two of them. The crude firearms in the hands of individual orc brats could be temporarily ignored. Although the firepower of the green-skinned guns was generally high, it was unrealistic to expect to injure a star warrior with just a few shots. But the weaponry in the hands of the killer cans was different. The multi-barrel autocannon opened fire. Schneider was hit several times, which affected the strength of his grip on the green warlord's arm. The large, ruthless sword slashed across his lower back. Chunks of his tough armor were blown away, blood splattered. The flesh-tearer still planned to pull out the great sword for another blow, aiming to completely sever the shrimpkin in half at the waist. But at that moment, Madden's chainsaw sword arrived. The fury of the Phoenix Battalion leader was immense, all vented through that one sword strike. With the burst of firelight, the chainsaw tore through the gap between the helmet and the breastplate, the enormous volume of blood spurting out due to the motion of the chainsaw, like a fountain. Just as Maddens had previously severed the warlord's forearm, this time he also cut off the opponent's head. Immediately afterward, Maddens didn't check on Schneider's condition but pulled out his chainsaw sword and, despite the fire from the killer can's autocannon, charged forward. The killer can seemed slightly larger than the orc warlord and bore a range of frightening close combat weapons. However, in terms of armor strength and power output, it couldn't compare with a genuine orc warlord. Moreover, with the confined space limiting movement, its combat effectiveness was further reduced. Maddens, in his rage, had also been injured by the autocannon, but still quickly dismantled the Orcish walking mecha. At the same time, the other two star warriors also charged out, and the three began a frenzied slaughter of those orcs who lacked the cover of heavy equipment. In the narrow space, the three were like highly efficient killing machines, and those green-skinned brutes had no power to fight back against chainsaw swords and combat blades. The elite soldiers of the Storm Corps at the rear wanted to help, but they found it unnecessary when they raised their guns. The greenskins they targeted often ended up slain the next moment. The soldiers looked at each other and, in the end, lowered their weapons. Better to stand down and avoid friendly fire. But in truth, the Star Warriors didn't kill that many greenskins at the entrance. After another 20 or so were dead, the remaining live orcs had all fled. Orcs weren't always endlessly courageous, especially after the death of their leader. Their morale would collapse, and they would flee. The retreating greenskins ran, all the while bellowing some language. Although it was hard to understand, one could guess they were saying their boss was dead. Maddens, panting, did not lead the charge out. He was furious, but still rational. In this place, they could utilize the terrain to kill countless greenskins. Out there, in the open, they couldn't withstand dozens of killer cans and armed trucks to annihilate thousands of orcs. They could only retreat, dragging Schneider and the Star Warrior wounded in the head to safety. At this moment, the noise from outside also became audible. Having lost their strongest leader, the Greenskins predictably showcased their traditional skill, beginning to fight amongst themselves. Chapter 210. Interstellar warriors are not invincible. There are too many strange and terrifying things in this universe. Actually, if those Greenskins had been a bit more strategic and, in particular, if that leader Tyrmede hadn't been so impatient to lead the charge, but instead kept sending murder cans with ordinary greenskin kids or even fart spirits to consume the ammunition and pave a way, and then had Tyrmede lead enough troops for a decisive, final blow, Madden's and the others' ultimate fate might have been total annihilation. Ultimately, there were too few interstellar warriors, and their weapons and equipment were too light infantry-oriented. If they had had more heat guns, plasma guns, heavy explosives, or micro-heat bombs, or if they had traded their combat blades and chainsaw swords for power weapons, perhaps the battle would have been easier, and the cost not so great. The two fallen interstellar warriors lay quietly on the ground, while the remaining three huddled next to them. The elites of the Storm Corps did not dare to come close, they naturally left space for these superhuman warriors. Today's battle, after those who had undergone Mr. Gu's special training and felt strong, clearly recognized the gap between themselves and the real superhuman warriors. Without these 5 interstellar warriors, relying on themselves alone, they probably would have been crushed like chicks by that orc warlord. However, even such powerful demigods have their moments of death. The warrior who was shot in the head had breathed his last. The first shot from the large-caliber machine gun had deformed his helmet, and the refined ceramic steel material could not withstand such a bombardment. The second shot went through the helmet, whose defense was greatly reduced after deformation, causing fatal damage to the brain tissue. Schneider was not yet dead, but if they had had a pharmacist and a dreadnought mech, he might have been able to change his identity, find a new way to continue living, and keep fighting for the Emperor. But they had none of these things. Schneider knew what was coming. He understood the condition of his body better than anyone else. With half his waist sliced open and multiple vital organs destructively damaged, the fact that he had not yet died and was even temporarily conscious was already a testament to the robust vitality of an interstellar warrior. He lay half reclined on the ground, his helmet long since removed, and the fresh blood bubbling from his mouth soiled his beard and half his face. Enjoy new tales for Novel Bin. Yet his expression was very calm. In contrast, Madden's and the other 2 phoenixes appeared much more sorrowful. It was then that Schneider spoke up. Why such a look? His voice was weak and strained. Excessive blood loss and organ destruction had allowed a great deal of blood to fill his lungs, making even breathing difficult, let alone speaking. But from his voice, one couldn't hear too much pain. He sounded very calm. The warriors beside him did not speak, nor did they stop Schneider from continuing. Logically, since he was nearly certain to die, they felt it was only right to let him speak his last words. Don't look so sad, isn't this our destiny? Is there really any interstellar warrior who can serve a certain term and retire peacefully? Dying on the battlefield is our inevitable end, it comes for all of us eventually. My only regret is that I won't get to see the revival of our war group. Madden's, to be honest, I have never accepted you as the leader of the war group. I'm stronger than you, more ruthless, more decisive, more like a tough warrior, yet the leader chose you to succeed him. Even now, it still bothers me. Since you became the leader, I've disagreed with almost every decision you've made. Sometimes I genuinely thought those decisions were indecisive and weak. But other times, well, I admit it was just because I couldn't get over it, intentionally opposing you, like this time coming to Rage Owl Star to seek help from Mr. Gu. On our way to Rage Owl Star, we encountered so many worlds where no one truly wanted to help us. This was one of our few options. Although Mr. Gu doesn't even have full control over his own world, and although this world is so barren, at least everything started to look hopeful. Now that I'm about to die, I must confront my inner feelings and tell you honestly, I acknowledge this Mr. Gu, I believe he really can help our war group to revive. Madden's, I know that since we've arrived at Rage Owl Star until now, we've already lost 3 brothers, including myself. This might shake your heart, after all, you've never been one to hold steady. But I need to tell you, don't waver, don't hesitate. Since we've made our choice, we must stand firm and keep going. Madden's was at a loss for words. The person who knows you best is your competitor, and he had to admit that Schneider had indeed seen into his heart. He did feel lost and shaken. How long had they been on this planet? Merely 2 months, yet 3 out of 7 brothers had died, including Schneider, a warrior even more seasoned than himself. The problems on this planet were far more severe than he had anticipated. A native evil god who had already fallen into hell, an orc tribe that had produced a warlord, these enemies were ones he had never considered before arriving at this star. With things continuing this way, could the 4 remaining members of the war group endure until the moment of Revival City's rebirth? What if Revival City's rebirth never arrives, and the war group perishes here? What he hadn't expected was that the person urging him to stay resolute would be Schneider. They say that a man's final words are often his good ones, and perhaps these were Schneider's true thoughts. But why had he undergone such a change? Maddens wanted to ask, but he was somewhat afraid to speak. Schneider, however, seemed to see right through to the thoughts in his heart. I've seen Mr. Gu's troops, that army under his command. If he was able to train such a formidable army in such a short time, with heroes inside it that even I have to acknowledge, what's not to believe? Maddens remained puzzled. Schneider was right, but those so-called brave soldiers, truth be told, in their long history of fighting, they had seen many such units of elite troops from various empires working together in combat. Is it really that significant? The blood-covered Schneider, however, revealed a faint smile. He struggled to raise his hand and gestured with a crook of his finger. Maddens leaned down, bringing his ear close to Schneider's mouth. Between the movements of his lips, Maddens heard news that shocked him. I've been to that secret research institute in Wuxing City, I've seen many black boxes. Chapter 211. When Gu Hang received the message, the battle was already over. Setting out early in the morning, the 1st Battalion of the Extinguishing Wind Regiment, under the command of Perbuff, pushed forward rapidly and soon discovered the group of greenskins that were still embroiled in internal strife, making no attempt whatsoever to conceal their tracks. They appeared to be divided into several factions, fighting among themselves ceaselessly. Perbuff was in no rush to provoke them. There was no need. With the greenskins fighting so fiercely among themselves, it was better to let them continue. Ideally, to have them all perish would be best. He would not be foolish enough to throw the lives of his soldiers into a battle while he could watch the enemy destroy each other. He passed the message backward and dispatched a few action teams to search for traces of the missing Special Operations Team, while the main force remained at a distance, patiently monitoring the situation. After a few hours, the 2nd and 3rd Battalions had also arrived. Having gathered 3 composite camps, or nearly 2,000 men, and watching as the greenskins were on the verge of finishing their fight, with a leader about to emerge, and some orc youth even attempting to flee in all directions, Perbuff chose to act. He did not want to let any of the surviving greenskins escape and add to the difficulty of subsequent mop-up operations. Before taking action, Perbuff requested artillery support from the rear. If it had been any earlier, the artillery would truly have been of no help to them. They had only just attached the towed artillery to trucks and reached the predetermined shelling position by late last night. As a result, early this morning and without a moment to catch their breath, they received his request for artillery support. Shell supplies were low, and the artillery brothers were exhausted. At that moment, only about 20 guns could be spared, firing 5 rounds each to deliver 100 shells in total. Enjoy new stories for Novel Bin. But that was enough. The greenskins, who had just been brawling, had no time whatsoever to set up anti-artillery positions and were bombarded into disarray. After the shelling, the mechanized 3 composite camps began their fierce charge. Perbuff's camp took the lead, with the 2nd and 3rd camps flanking from the left and the right. With numerical superiority and completely mechanized teams, except for the artillery troops left behind at the joint artillery position, they had tanks, armored vehicles and infantry transported by trucks, giving them formidable overall combat power. In contrast, the greenskins initially numbered only about 1,000, with many dead after their internal fighting. The most threatening of them, the killerkin walking mechas, were destroyed in great numbers both during their own fighting and under the artillery barrage. The remaining ones, when facing tanks and armored vehicles, still posed a threat but became the primary targets for concentrated fire. Fortunately, the killer cans were different from the powerful death tin cans or even the defense capabilities of the heavy armored orc warlord, which could match the strength of the interstellar warrior-powered armor. The smaller and much thinner killer cans, when facing the concentrated fire of at least 10 or more twin-barreled machine guns, experienced continuous deformation of their metal armor until it was eventually penetrated and torn apart. Besides the machine guns on the armored vehicles, the 76mm smoothbore guns on the domestically produced Challenger tanks, in coordination with the machine guns on the walkers, could deliver significant damage to the killer cans with a single shot. If they had unified command and sufficient armored strength, relying on the formidable physique of the green Skin Orcs, they might have had a chance to break out. But clearly, they did not. Greenskins do not surrender, but they will run, charge mindlessly, and fight independently. Annihilating this group of green Skin Orcs was not a problem. Casualties were inevitable, but this was likely the last organized troop of green Skin Orcs. This was the final battle before victory. After the battle was over and the battlefield was being cleared, Major Prabhup received word from the special operations team he had sent out to search. They had found the interstellar warriors. The commander of the Phoenix battle group requested to see the commanding officer here. And so, Major Prabhup met the stern-faced Maddens. The two did not converse much. Maddens simply informed Major Prabhup about the underground space where they had been hiding before. Previously, Maddens had ordered a few soldiers from the Storm Corps to thoroughly investigate the area. The initial intention was to find other exits to prepare escape routes and avoid being ambushed. However, what the Storm Corps soldiers found was unexpected. It turned out to be a research institute, conducting biological research from the prosperous era before the destruction of Rage Owl Star. The data contained within might reveal the origins of the rapidly developing green Skin Orcs found within the ruins of the High Tower. However, since their main focus at the time had been on the battle, they did not delve deeper into exploration. Maddens suggested that Major Prabhup should take good care of and protect the site for future exploration. After presenting this information, Maddens left with his 4 brothers, including the bodies of 2 fallen comrades, requesting a troop transport truck to depart. 2 interstellar warriors, together with the 2 bodies, headed for Revival City. They had completed their mission, and it was time to leave. Maddens, on the other hand, went straight to the rear to find Mr. Gu. Gu Hang encountered Maddens on his way to the Wartime Research Institute. He had already received information in advance and roughly knew what had happened, especially about the 2 interstellar warriors who had died. To be honest, this was not what Gu Hang wanted to see. He had previously thought about waiting until all the interstellar warriors were dead, then, using the event of the Phoenix's demise which granted him the ability to exchange for gene seeds, to mass-produce his own super soldiers. But regardless of whether this action was despicable, one shouldn't do it now. Not to mention the considerable expenditure of grace points, he hadn't found a place to buy powered armor yet. He had already felt the significance of super soldiers like the interstellar warriors in the war. Furthermore, the Phoenix battle group led by Maddens had always cooperated quite well with him. They had never shirked from the tasks he issued and got straight to work. Wasn't that good enough? Gu Hang certainly did not wish for them all to die. Even the loss of 2 of them pained him, just like losing 2 of his own elite men. Upon meeting Maddens, he offered his condolences to the group commander who had lost his brothers and then expressed that if anything was needed subsequently, he should speak up. For instance, the equipment suitable for gene seed surgery had already been ordered through others. This was not to deceive Maddens. In fact, Gu Hang had indeed contacted a caravan of the Empire Commerce Guild through Yelazaya. That caravan had agreed to slightly alter their trade route to pass through Rage Owl Star and was expected to arrive before too long. However, even after hearing Gu Hang speak thus, Maddens's expression did not improve much. Since coming to find Mr. Gu, he had already planned to be frank about everything. "Governor, about that secret research institute, what's with those black boxes?" Chapter 212. Maddens suddenly mentioning the secret research institute and the black boxes was beyond Gu Hang's expectations. But his expression remained very stable. He replied, "Have you seen them yourself?" "No, but Schneider had," Maddens responded. "Hey!" Gu Hang let out a breath, thinking again about deploying his interstellar warriors ahead of schedule. Just to be watchdogs, how great that would be! If a team of interstellar warriors were guarding his research institute, Schneider wouldn't have had such an easy time getting his hands on them. Black boxes were his second biggest secret, second only to the system. The security level there was very high, and under normal conditions, no one could get close. Anyone ignoring warnings would be shot on sight. But, as was said, that's under normal conditions. A master like Schneider was clearly not a normal circumstance. Clad in power armor and covered by a dark cloak, slipping in by night, his huge frame moving soundlessly and very quickly, it's hard to do anything against such a master, who could scout everything out with such methods. It's unreasonable to expect those mechanical servant soldiers to defend against interstellar warriors, it's just not realistic. Lacking sufficient security forces, it's impossible to prevent such things. As for Maddens's current questioning, Gu Hang sighed and continued, Commander Maddens, we are partners, so I don't want to deceive you with excuses. Please don't ask where these manufacturers come from. I can only say I have my secrets. Can you understand that? Maddens remained silent. Secrets? He instinctively felt something was amiss at the word. A planetary governor with some unspeakable secrets, is that ever good news? While the ownership of a black box manufacturer itself is not illegal in fact, such ancient super-technological items are treasures ceaselessly sought by the human empire throughout the universe. It's precisely because they are so valuable that a seemingly unremarkable and even somewhat shabby planetary governor should not possess them. Why would he have one? Let alone several? Gu Hang chuckled softly and continued, I really cannot tell you the origins of these black box manufacturers. But please believe that my faith in the Emperor and my loyalty to the Empire are unwavering. You are right here on Rage Owl Star, right next to my government, my city. You are more than welcome to keep your eyes wide open and see for yourself whether there is anything disloyal going on here. We are exterminating the cultists lurking within the city, we are annihilating the green-skinned aliens that are popping up on the planet, we are building our cities and factories, reclaiming lands controlled by what could be called traitors. All of this is to ensure the entire planet remains loyal and able to better pay its taxes to the Empire. Everything I am doing is perfectly in line with the Empire's expectations of a planetary governor. Even, I believe I'm doing a better job than most governors. Gu Hang emphasized his loyalty, supporting it with his actions on the planet during this period of time. After hearing all this, even Maddens had to nod. If you claim there's something wrong with Gu Hang, you need to have proper evidence, right? You can't just use possession of the black boxes against someone. There is no crime in owning treasures. In fact, Maddens saw no signs of decay, corruption, or disloyalty under Gu Hang's power. At this point, even Maddens had to soften his expression, Mr. Gu, I do not doubt your loyalty, but... He didn't know how to continue appropriately. But Gu Hang followed his pause, stating, but you suspect that these black boxes of mysterious origin imply I could be deceived or lured by some sinister force. Maddens said nothing, which was as good as agreeing. Gu Hang responded with a smile, then as I said earlier, just wait and see. Maddens looked hard at Gu Hang and declared, I will be watching you closely, Mr. Gu. Ha ha ha. Gu Hang laughed heartily, open and unreserved, then it's settled. Ending his laughter, Gu Hang adopted a serious demeanor, however, Commander Maddens, I hope you can keep this matter confidential. You are aware of the preciousness of the black box manufacturer, and you understand the trouble I would face if word got out that there's more than one such device on Rage Owl Star, amidst the Star Sea. Commander, you need to understand one thing, we are closely connected. The development of Rage Owl Star and the rebirth of the Phoenix are strongly linked. The black boxes are not just tools that I use to build the entire planet, they are also key to the Phoenix's reconstruction. This news should never be leaked, wouldn't you agree? By this point, Gu Hang spoke with an earnest attitude. Maddens once again had to concede that Gu Hang was right. When the fate of the battle group was tied to the planet's development, what reason would he have to betray this information? He even recalled what Mr. Gu had told him when he first persuaded him to keep his forces on Rage Owl Star. At that time, Mr. Gu had made a bold claim that he would turn the entire planet into a forging world. Back then, Maddens thought Gu Hang was just making empty promises, boasting. But now, it seems Gu Hang genuinely had the capital to fulfill them. No wonder, just before Schneider's demise, he had made statements that strengthened his resolve, prohibiting any wavering and ensuring he stood by Mr. Gu. Chapter 213. It seems I'm still too indecisive. Schneider wasn't too fond of Mr. Gu at first, but after seeing the black box, he kept the secret to himself and even changed his mind, hoping that the battle group would cooperate fully with the governor. And yet, I wavered. He forced a wry smile and said to Gu Hang, I will keep your secret, Your Excellency the Governor, the battle group's future rebuild is in great need of your assistance. Rest assured, I will not forget the Phoenix battle group's outstanding contributions to the safety of Rage Owl Star. The gene seed implantation devices needed by the group will be ready soon. After seeing off a preoccupied Maddens, Gu Hang also let out a slight sigh of relief. He wasn't really too worried about Maddens spreading the secret of the black box after learning of it. The sincere conversation they just had was merely to make sure that the head of the battle group didn't do anything foolish. As long as he wasn't muddle-headed, when the fate of the battle group was tied to the development of the planet, even from his own self-interest, he shouldn't betray the planet. And now, since Maddens had already made guarantees and promises, there was even less need to worry. Without dwelling any further on the matter, Gu Hang continued to follow his planned schedule and headed to the pre-war research institute that was located underground, where the interstellar warriors had previously fought to the death. By the time he arrived, the place had been secured by soldiers from the Wind Extinguishing Brigade. They had also conducted a thorough investigation to ensure its safety and had marked out the general function of every different room and area. Further exploration, let alone the excavation of research materials inside, was not something the grunts were fit to handle. Gu Hang had already sent a message to the Secret Research Institute in Wuxing City, asking Wu Jiarong to bring people over to check it out. If the research materials here were indeed of great value, then the lady, whose level had actually risen to that of a mechanical priest, would stay here for a while. If they were of average value, then it would suffice to leave a few ordinary technicians to do some archaeological work. This time, Gu Hang had come in person not for the potential technical materials that might be contained in the research institute. He just wanted to know the historical records of why greenskins had appeared on Rage Owl Star. It was not merely out of curiosity, the requirement on the event panel was just as such. Getting what he wanted to know wasn't difficult. Soon, he found some simple record materials. It turned out that in the pre-war era, this place was a biological research institute, employed by the Planetary government. They had acquired a live greenskin craftsman technician in an attempt to study the biological form of greenskins and to understand how their brains were structured and why they could create such unique greenskin technology. They had some research findings, but they were not key, mostly being theoretical stuff. However, just as they were about to destroy the experimental materials, the war broke out, and this place was quickly overrun. After initiating a full lockdown of the lab, there was no need to worry about it being broken into by chaos traitors, but it also meant that the lab had been sealed for a very long time without being opened. The records stopped there, but Gu Hang could roughly guess the rest. After all, having been sealed for such a lengthy period, the safety systems might not have been able to hold up any longer. Moreover, this was a place that scavengers and adventurers explored. Due to some reason, the research institute being reopened and the preserved experimental specimen that greenskin craftsman technician being released was also a possibility. No wonder this greenskin tribe developed quite rapidly. Starting with a craftsman technician from a spacefaring greenskin tribe could not be considered a pure start from scratch. Even though the environment wasn't quite suitable and it started with just an old aging orc, 10 years after being unearthed, a strong greenskin tribe had tenaciously emerged here. Gu Hang could even imagine, if not for his intervention, what would this greenskin orc tribe have developed into after completely conquering Rubbish Town, slaughtering, and enslaving its 200,000 to 300,000 people? Especially after leaving behind the ruins of the High Tower, an inhospitable place for the growth of greenskin spores, and reaching a place with abundant water and relatively fertile land, where live humans could be used as raw materials, their numbers would likely explode in growth in a short amount of time. By that time, what he would have to face wouldn't be just a greenskin orc tribe of tens of thousands. And as long as their numbers increased 3 to 5 times, coupled with their technology level far surpassing that of the primitive orcs, the trend of greenskins rampaging across the entire planet would have been unstoppable. Given the current state of Rage Owl Star, how could it withstand the frenetic development of several 100,000 greenskins? One could only say, thankfully, that worst-case scenario didn't come to pass. After Gu Hang figured out the intelligence on the origin of the greenskin orcs on Rage Owl Star, the second phase of the greenskin threat event in the event panel was also considered complete. The so-called important intelligence that served as a reward for this phase was obediently lying in the panel, ready for him to claim with a mere thought. However, before that, another piece of news caught his attention. The entire campaign against the greenskin orcs had finally brought up the settlement page. Previously, the back-and-forth skirmishes took place more than once, but there had never been any battle settlement data in the system interface. At that time, he had a suspicion, those battles would probably not be calculated separately but would be incorporated into the overall campaign of the greenskin threat. The rewards would not be settled until the entire campaign was over. And now, his conjecture seemed to indeed be true. Slight advantage achieved, granted 2189 favor points. Total losses 9,144, enemies slain 37,823, prisoners 0. Rubbish Town Militia, allies losses 3,447, enemies slain 217. Governor General Corps, losses 5,697, enemies slain 15,022. Phoenix Battle Group, allies losses 2, enemies slain 230. Imperial Navy, allies losses 0, enemies slain 22,354. 2189 favor points in profit. Seeing this figure, Gu Heng had only one thought in mind: war is indeed more profitable. It was just a pity that only over 15,000 were counted as his confirmed kills. The rubbish town militia item could be ignored. It seemed that the adventurers there were counted as allies before the major reorganization of Rubbish Town and weren't considered as his troops. After all, the Rubbish Town militia was truly rubbish at that time, losing over 3,000 for a mere 200 kills. It didn't have much impact. The exchange ratio achieved by the interstellar warriors was really fierce. Despite being completely outnumbered, they not only managed a ratio of 100 to 1 but also included the highest leader of the Orc clan, the Orc warlord. If he had been present in the frontal battlefield, he could have likely slaughtered hundreds of human soldiers. However, their total number was small, and the number of enemies they killed was not large, so their achievements could temporarily be ignored. The most important was the Imperial Navy's quintet, whose full round of orbital bombardment killed over 20,000 greenskins. This achievement would not be credited to Gu Heng's account, nor would it provide him with any favor rewards. But it was equally crucial. Without the 20,000 greenskins killed by the orbital bombardment, if it had all been left to the forces under Gu Heng to push forward, the cost to him could have been unimaginable. He couldn't risk the victory of the entire campaign just for the favor points he could gain from killing enemies. Moreover, even these 2,000 or so favor points were very satisfying. Adding the previous balance, Gu Heng now had 3079 favor points in his hands. At this, he felt greatly relieved. With so many favor points, many of Gu Heng's plans could finally come to fruition. The architectural system, which he hadn't been able to work on previously, could now be invested in, especially the Loyal Air Academy he had long desired. The exchange of interstellar warrior gene seeds which he had previously hesitated over due to their high price was now achievable with his surplus favor points. He could exchange for a few to try out. The traveling merchants he had contacted had brought him several sets of interstellar warrior-powered armor, and now he could experiment with creating his own interstellar warriors. He could also continue to invest in the technological system, further expand the technological level of his territory, and develop several more industrial lines. Every technology he had elicited had yielded results. In short, with enough favor points, there was a lot he could do. Chapter 214. With 3,000 grace points in hand, Gu Heng felt the troubles of sudden wealth. However, after calming down, he thought that although the number of grace points was not small, there were equally many places that were eagerly waiting for money to be spent. If he really followed his plan, he feared that even if he threw all 3,000 grace points in, it would only make a few splashes. For example, the exchange of genetic seeds for interstellar warriors, if he threw all 3,000 grace points into it, it would yield only 30 seeds. Building them was something that could not be sustained. He still needed to plan carefully. While making money is important, how to spend it is also a matter of knowledge. But this was something that didn't need to be rushed for now. The grace points were already in his hands and they weren't going anywhere. He had plenty of time to arrange things properly. He shifted his gaze to the important intelligence that could already be activated on the event panel. What could it be? With a thought, he opened the intelligence. When he truly saw the message, a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. Now, he had only one thought: it was a good thing he handled this event, and he solved it rather quickly. Otherwise, if he missed this intelligence, a disaster would have occurred. An elder of this Greenskin Orc tribe, the master craftsman Gorgon, created a cosmic communicator during the tribe's prosperous times and reached out to his mother clan, the Space Greenskin Orcs of the Iron Tooth clan, with a communication request. In the communication, he mentioned the location and the cosmic coordinates of Rage Owl Star, inviting the main forces of the Iron Tooth clan to come. After sending out the message, there was no reply and Gorgon had forgotten about it. But in fact, his message was successfully transmitted. He had simply forgotten to build a receiver in the communicator. A pirate plundering fleet of the Iron Tooth clan received the message and is now heading towards Rage Owl Star. In the near future, the 10th plundering fleet of the Iron Tooth clan will pass through the Star Realm Tunnel and reach the jump point of the Rage Owl Star system. Coincidentally, an Imperial merchant fleet is also about to pass through the Star Realm Tunnel and reach the jump point around the same time. If he hadn't received this intelligence, Gu Hang dared not think about what would have happened. The merchant fleet was one he had invited. The Empire Commerce Guild, belonging to one of the official organizations of the Empire, is necessary to get approval and be registered as a merchant in order to form a merchant fleet capable of navigating the endless boundaries of the Empire. Otherwise, one might very likely be treated as a pirate. Fortunately, registering as an imperial merchant wasn't too complicated, nor was the threshold too high. As long as one's identity and the goods being transported were clear, and they were willing to accept missions issued by the Empire Commerce Guild when necessary, that would suffice. Of course, a spaceship capable of traveling through the Star Realm Tunnel was indispensable. When registering as an imperial merchant, the first and third items are generally more rigorously checked. As for the second item, the goods, in principle, the requirements are also very strict. But sometimes, it's all down to one's own abilities. And the people who can do business with the imperial merchant also need to have permission. Generally speaking, these permissions are granted to planetary governors. In reality, as the governor of Rage Owl Star, one of Gu Hang's major powers was the ability to trade with the Empire Commerce Guild. The output of Rage Owl Star was very limited, but it still needed important goods from other empires' worlds, and there was a huge profit margin in between. The trade quotas in between were controlled by the planetary governor, and that was precisely the basis for past governors to acquire power without the support of cruisers and with a scarcity of manpower. Of course, Gu Hang didn't need to acquire power that way now. However, it had been different when he first arrived. A month ago, he took the initiative through Yelazaya to contact the Empire Commerce Guild, hoping that a merchant would adjust the route to pass by Rage Owl Star system and engage in some trade. This was actually a bit difficult. Rage Owl Star was too small, and the past trade records were rather modest. But what if Gu Hang was a member of the Gu family? In this aspect, his family's status still played a certain role. The merchant who came, named Wang Jiarong, was Gu Hang's cousin. Besides the regular trade goods, her ship was also carrying two items that Gu Hang had specially ordered and cared about a lot, both related to interstellar warriors. Interstellar warrior-powered armor and the biological equipment needed for the implantation of genetic seeds. Whether it was for the hard-won trade opportunity, for the goods specifically ordered on the ship, or for his smiling cousin who had a pretty good relationship with his predecessor, he had to find a way to save that merchant fleet. Moreover, the 10th pirate plundering fleet of the Iron Tooth clan mentioned in the intelligence was already targeting Rage Owl Star. Was it not best to deal with them decisively when they might clash with the Imperial merchant fleet, rather than waiting for them to complete their plunder before taking action? Given the Greenskins' technological capabilities, even if the Empire's ships were turned into scrap, that space debris could still be collected by them and used as materials. Not to mention the various goods stored within the merchant fleet. As for how to deal with the greenskin pirates mentioned in the intelligence, Rage Owl Star definitely did not have the capacity. It was estimated that the entire planet didn't even have orbital defense means, a single starship couldn't be found, let alone launching an offensive. Chapter 215. But isn't there a quintet floating in the planet's orbit? A legitimate Imperial Navy main cruiser. Gu Hang almost immediately contacted Yelazaya. The female captain, upon hearing that a squad of greenskin pirates was approaching, not only did not show gravity or panic but felt excited instead. In the sky, fulfilling the governor's request, conducting orbital strikes, although this also counted as a merit for the Navy, it couldn't compare to fighting a naval battle, annihilating a greenskin fleet, and saving a fleet of the Empire Commerce Guild. The latter was the opportunity that Colonel Yelazaya longed for in her dreams, where true naval glory lay. However, Yelazaya wasn't blinded by this news. What's the source of the information? Is it accurate? I can assure its accuracy, Gu Hang said. In the battle on the surface, I captured a cosmic signal transceiver that explicitly mentioned this. But I can't guarantee when that greenskin pirate fleet will arrive. Yelazaya then asked, can the size of that fleet be known? Gu Hang gave a wry smile and shook his head, that's where the risk lies. I can only tell you that the fleet should belong to the Iron Tooth clan, 10th plundering fleet. As for how many ships it contains, the scale of its main force, I have no idea. Then that's quite troubling, Yelazaya said. I have only one ship here. If the greenskins are many and strong and we attempt an ambush, it would be like throwing ourselves into the net. Yes, Gu Hang agreed. So, is there a way to get support? We need more ships. Is it possible to call the Tianma Star Sector fleet to send more reinforcements? I would have done so even without you telling me. But, we must also prepare for the worst. What if they don't arrive in time? At this time, Yelizaya's mind was very clear. She craved military honors, yearned for destroying the enemy's ships in a grand naval battle, earning glory and erasing the impression that she got her position through connections. But equally, as someone who graduated from the Imperial Navy officer training with excellent results all the way, she was no fool. Nor was she cynical. She clearly understood that her family background was not a burden but a significant aid. If she continued on this path, whether now or in the future, she was destined to be one of the top people in the Tianma Star sector, at least as a backup. Service honors were indeed important. However, if the risk of seeking them were too great, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. If this naval battle merely resulted in a loss, if only in sacrificing the Rage Owl Star, that might still be okay. She would have borne the shame of defeat or the disgrace of fleeing without fighting, but there would still be a chance to redeem herself. But if she were to recklessly engage in battle and lose the quintet, the main cruiser, dying with the ship would end it all. Even if she survived, there would be no chance of a comeback, and it would also bring disaster upon her family. Such a high cost made caution mandatory. Gu Heng understood this point. He pondered for a moment and said, "We are not fighting alone. The Empire merchant fleet heading to Rage Owl Star is led by my cousin. As far as I know, she has not only one main armed commerce ship but also 2 escort ships. We could ambush near the warp point. If the Greenskin fleet encounters the merchant fleet, we can decide whether to join the battle or not depending on the situation." In doing so, Gu Heng was suspected of throwing his cousin under the bus. But in fact, without saying so, he couldn't persuade Yelizaya to take the risk and join the fight. "Feasible," Yelizaya said. "But I have to be upfront with the ugly part. The specific size of a greenskin pirate plundering fleet is not fixed, and if the situation turns sour, I will make an immediate decision to retreat and avoid the edge." "I understand." At this point, Gu Heng also felt quite heavy-hearted. "You don't need to worry too much. Even if that happens, you vigorously resist on the surface of the planet. Once I rally with the main force of the Star Sector fleet, I will come to your aid immediately. As long as you hold on, there's still hope." Hearing this, what more could Gu Heng say? He could only nod his head. If the incoming greenskins were truly numerous and fierce, and even the main cruiser quintet had to make a break for it, Rage Owl Star was definitely doomed. He just hoped that situation wouldn't arise. After finishing the discussion with Colonel Yelizaya, Gu Heng led his troops away from the tower ruins and returned to the main camp outside Rubbish Town, where he temporarily stayed. He needed to reorganize his troops here. The 7th Garrison Division was essentially dismantled, leaving only its framework. The officers were mostly retained, but the troops were reassigned to the 1st Brigade, 2nd Division and 3rd Independent Regiment. These 2.5 brigade-sized units, the Wind Extinguishing Brigade, only had 3 camps, had a total force exceeding 20,000 men. Their equipment and ammunition were given priority. Furthermore, Gu Heng put the 3 composite camps of the 1st Brigade and the full 2nd Division, totaling over 13,000 troops, through extra training with the Beast Slaughter Group. These 20,000 troops would soon board the transport ships descending from the quintet and enter the starship. This was the assistance that Colonel Yelizaya requested, and Gu Heng had agreed to it. Although, there was a chance of encountering an overwhelmingly strong enemy, and the colonel might take her elite troops and make a dash for it. But Gu Heng never pinned his hopes on resisting alone on the planet after the quintet had fled. That was unrealistic. On the contrary, he too boarded the ship. He harbored 2 thoughts. Firstly, if the enemy was relatively strong, and Colonel Yelizaya contemplated retreat, he would then try to earnestly persuade the lady to join the battle. If necessary, his 20,000 soldiers and the 4 urgently summoned phoenixes would be his bargaining chip to sway Colonel Yelizaya. Secondly, if the enemy was indeed too powerful to fight against, then, his life mattered most. He would flee with Colonel Yelizaya and wait to join the main fleet of the Star Sector before striking back. But if it really came down to that second scenario, it wouldn't just mean that all of Gu Heng's efforts for a long time had been wasted, but also that there might not be a chance to start over. A planetary governor fleeing with the Imperial Navy before the fall of his planet came with enormous political costs. When the time came, he might end up in court and possibly dead. Therefore, Gu Heng hoped above all not to resort to the second option. He needed to resolve the matter at the first opportunity. A few days later, at the first jump point of the Rage Owl Star system, beneath the flickering blue light, 4 ships suddenly emerged from the void. Among these 4 vessels, the largest, about one-third the size of the quintet and comparable to a main destroyer of the Imperial Navy. This was the Beautiful Girl, an armed merchant ship. Although large, it only carried a little over 20,000 sailors, and its armor thickness, void shield strength, and firepower were far less than that of a main destroyer of the same size. Next to the Beautiful Girl were three much smaller vessels. These were not merchant ships, although they could also carry some cargo if necessary. These were three escort ships, each about 800 meters long, carrying over 7,000 sailors. Their owner was named Wang Jiarong. This young woman, resembling a girl, dressed in a white skirt decorated with golden patterns, with a golden sheer draped over her. She stood in the captain's room, gazing out at the boundless star sea through a distant window. Supporting the white round-edged cap on her head, her beautiful face bore a trace of concern. Behind her, the vast ship control room was frantically processing information from the ship's thinker array. At the jump point, they had detected the approach of another unfamiliar fleet. In at most an hour, that fleet would pass through the jump point and arrive in the real universe. Chapter 216. In this vast universe, the most critical reliance for interstellar travel is the star realm tunnel. A single star realm tunnel connects two star systems, compressing distances that span hundreds, thousands, or even tens of thousands of light years into a journey of just a few days, at most around a month. Cosmic ships, starships, that possess the capability to enter a star realm tunnel essentially enter a state of hyperspace upon doing so. The normal state of travel for a starship in the cosmos is to navigate at sub-light speed within a star system, from one jump point to the next, then into a star realm tunnel, arriving at another star system, and finding the next jump point. This necessitates the use of star charts, as well as navigators. These individuals are trained spiritual energy practitioners. Only they are capable of distinguishing the exact locations of star realm tunnel jump points in the void of space, guiding the ship through the tunnel to the other side. Thus, the so-called star charts also become meaningful. Star charts display the many star domains connected through star realm tunnels. Two physically adjacent star systems could be vastly different in reality. Perhaps two physically close star systems, only tens of light years apart, but without a direct star realm tunnel connection, require traversal through several tunnels for travel, making them effectively distant from each other, whereas two physically distant star systems, tens of thousands of light years apart, may be connected by a star realm tunnel, making them adjacent on the star chart. Within the human empire, the physical distance between star systems doesn't matter much. Without the star realm tunnels, relying solely on the ship's own propulsion at sub-light speed, even the closest stellar communications are unrealistic. Of course, physical distance cannot be entirely disregarded. Some monsters and demons truly manage to endure countless years of time, slowly flying through the cosmic void, and indeed emerge from it. Within the territorial divisions of the Empire, cosmos domains, star sectors, star systems, these four structures are all based on the star chart. The dense network of star realm tunnels, like a massive web, connects the entire Empire's territories. Within the Rage Owl star system, there are three star realm tunnels. Tunnel 1 connects to the Corollia star system, Tunnel 2 to the Hagian star system, and Tunnel 3, instead of connecting to the Tianma star sector, connects to the neighboring Divine Steed star sector. Both the Tianma star sector and the Divine Steed star sector belong to the Dragonhawk star domain and are under the jurisdiction of the Eastern Cosmos domain. Wang Jiarong's merchant fleet had just come from Tunnel 1, having wrapped up a deal in the Corollia star system. Originally, her travel plan did not include a stop at the remote Rage Owl star, but wasn't it Yelizaya who had conveyed her cousin's needs to her? After pondering a bit, taking a detour to the Rage Owl star system, then heading to the Hagian star through Tunnel 2, and finally returning to Corollia 3 before going back to Capital Wing star didn't seem to pose a major problem. Covering extra distance, visiting two more planets, she shouldn't come out at a loss. She might not earn much, but she decided to consider it supporting her cousin, whom she hadn't spent little time messing around with during their childhood. From the Corollia star system to the Rage Owl star system, the fleet would spend 5 days traversing the star realm tunnel. Nothing significant occurred during the first 4 days, as the usual bizarre scenes outside the windows passed by, but in reality, as long as one didn't leave the range of the ship or recklessly send out any probes or the like, there wouldn't be any danger. However, on the 5th day, the navigator aboard the Beautiful Girl reported a message. They had detected an anomalous signal in the star realm tunnel. Seemingly a fleet was following right behind them, also traversing the same tunnel. This unsettled Wang Jiarong greatly. The tunnel from Karolia to Rage Owl was desolate, not a busy space route. The Empire didn't even bother with building any checkpoints at the jump points on either end. Beyond the desolation of Rage Owl Star, this situation had already persisted for over 100 years. Aside from her fleet, who else would traverse this place? Heading to the neighboring Divine Steed Star sector? That wasn't likely either. The prosperous nest capital world Koragia had a direct route to the Divine Steed Star sector. No one would travel through Rage Owl Star to reach Divine Steed Star sector, as taking such detours and incurring higher costs was not something people did. So what was the situation with this fleet? In interstellar travel, any anomaly demands vigilance. Even within the Empire's cosmos domains, safety isn't truly guaranteed. Pirates are the most common threat, but threats originating from other alien species are never lacking. The Empire refers to all non-human species as aliens and is committed to eradicating all intelligent species other than humans. Not to mention, navigating through Star Realm tunnels one often encounters supernatural occurrences. For instance, a derelict ship stranded inside a tunnel, dozens or hundreds of people disappearing from a ship during a voyage, or sometimes unexpectedly gaining dozens or hundreds more. These incidents have even become somewhat commonplace. And now, being acutely aware that not just one ship, but an entire fleet was behind them, sharing the same Star Realm tunnel, they couldn't afford to be anything but cautious. After completing the Star Realm jump, they didn't dare to linger, choosing to immediately switch engine modes and gradually accelerate, striving to reach the upper limit of sub-light speed towards Rage Owl Star. Wang Jiarong was aware that Yelizaya's cruiser was docked in orbit around Rage Owl Star. After joining with the quintet, her merchant ships would have strong protective safety. Chapter 217. For this reason, she ordered the star speakers on the ships, also psychics who had undergone special training, to try and make contact with quintet. However, the star speakers brought her some rather bad news. They couldn't get in touch with quintet. Star speech messages had been sent out, but there was no response. This situation deepened Wang Jiarong's anxiety even further. There were only two reasons for the lack of contact: either their star speech messages were being blocked and intercepted, preventing transmission, or quintet was unable to receive their messages. Neither scenario was good news. It took some time for a ship to come out of warp and resume regular sub-light speed travel, as it needed time to accelerate its engines. She now only hoped that this acceleration process would pass quickly, which is why she had repeatedly urged the mechanical priest in charge of the engines. At the same time, she ordered the entire fleet to enter first-level battle readiness, making sure they were prepared to face the enemy at any moment. Beautiful Girl was equipped and ready to fire with 11 M-class hammer colossal cannons. Each of the other 3 escort ships was armed with 15 S-class Defender rapid-fire cannons and 3 M-class Avenger cluster laser cannons. All of these ship cannons, as well as the operators behind them, the fire control systems, and navigation systems, were part of the Thinker Array, which had also entered the highest state of combat readiness. The so-called Thinker Array referred to a wetware collective formed by psychics, or even ordinary people, who had undergone special training under Thinker technology, along with basic mechanical calculators. It assisted in ship operation and helped the cannons with calibrating and firing. Despite all the war preparations, Wang Jiarong still prayed to the Emperor, hoping that misfortune would not truly befall her. It would be best if nothing happened, and the current tension and extra preparations, even if they turned out to be in vain, would not matter. However, not every prayer results in a favorable outcome. "They're coming out." The navigator's voice rang in Wang Jiarong's ears. She quickly returned to the main control console, switching the screen to the position opposite the direction of the starship's travel. In the void, many ships were gradually revealing their shapes. In reality, the distance between them was already over 50,000 kilometers. However, this distance was still too close in space. On the virtual screen enlarged by the Thinker Array in front of her, the identities of those ships that were trailing them, crossing through the warp point, and entering the real universe, became very clear. The green Skin Orcs fleet. This could be determined from their exaggerated, haphazard appearance, looking like a pile of trash haphazardly put together. Only green Skin Orc warships would have such a look. But as unattractive, with random paint jobs, and lacking conventional aesthetic sense they were, and as rough in appearance as to not seem like products of technology, they were indeed bona fide interstellar warships. 1, 2, 3, 4, 12 green-skinned warships. Can anyone tell me why there are so many greenskins here? Wang Jiarong was somewhat distraught. But no one could answer her question. The higher-ups of the merchant fleet at the control console were not inexperienced, the orc ships that appeared behind them were not easy to deal with. In the starry sky, there is a most intuitive way to judge the strength of a starship: look at its size. Of course, it is impossible to be 100% accurate, as countless exceptions can prove this point. However, when the technological levels are not vastly different, as a general rule, the larger the warship, the stronger it is. At the moment, of the 12 green-skinned warships, 4 are as large as the destroyers in the human Empire fleet, the remaining 8 are at least the size of an escort ship. And these ships are armed with huge, outwardly ostentatious cannons, embodying the green-skin orcs style: caliber is king. Wang Jiarong struggled to maintain her composure and gave her orders: engineering, full speed ahead. We must try to escape before the green-skin fleet has a chance to accelerate. All gunnery crews, fire at will at the green-skin fleet. Focus fire on single targets. Try to cause as much damage as possible. Yes, ma'am. Who on the entire ship didn't know that this was a critical moment? No one dared slack off when their lives hung in the balance. Increasing the distance and attempting to flee was obviously the right choice. The beautiful girl was slightly larger than the typical mainline destroyer, but most of that space was taken up by the cargo hold. The strength of its void shields and the ship's own armor could barely match that of a destroyer, yet its firepower was at best only half that of a standard destroyer. The other 3 escort ships were indeed up to normal specifications, carrying only a small amount of cargo. Against the green-skin fleet's configuration of 4+8, a head-on confrontation was hopeless. Firing was just something to do when there was nothing else, running was the key. While trying to escape at full speed, it was impossible for them to adjust the ship's position to allow all guns to fire at the enemy. In reality, if they fired backwards now, at best only a third of their firepower could be utilized. However, these green-skinned ships had just left the Star Realm tunnel. The energy shields on the ships were activated, but it was clear the power hadn't been cranked up to the maximum yet. Just after emerging from the Star Realm tunnel, the starships were at their most vulnerable. Because of this, 3 volleys of concentrated fire directly disabled a green-skin frigate. The energy shield of the green-skinned warship overloaded, swiftly changing from a blue glow to a dangerous red. A barrage of fire went through the overloaded shield and struck the hull. The armor was shattered, the hull severely damaged, and if one zoomed in closer, one could even see numerous green-skin orcs being ejected from the broken parts of the ship. This green-skin frigate basically lost its combat capability. If the greenskins were to win the battle, they might be able to retrieve and repair the ship, but at the very least, in this battle, the frigate was no longer a threat. With an initial victory, Wang Jiarong was somewhat invigorated, and the morale of the entire convoy improved slightly. However, this was almost the only good news, as the bad news just kept coming one after another. When they shifted their focus to the second green-skin ship, the green-skin fleet had already overcome the vulnerability of just having completed the jump. Not only did this mean that the energy shields on their ships were fully operational and not so easily penetrated anymore, but it also meant that the weapons systems were also up and running. The 11 remaining operational green-skin starships opened fire simultaneously. Kinetic cannons, green-skin laser cannons, all fired fiercely. The style of green-skin ships, in keeping with the overall style of their race, typically features a larger number of guns of higher caliber compared to human warships of the same class. However, they also continue the trait of generally much less precision than human navy cannons. But the distance between the two forces was just too close. At this moment, the gap had widened to around 70,000 kilometers at most, which in space warfare was almost considered point-blank range. The human side was set to suffer greatly. Aboard Wang Jiarong's 4 ships, blue lights flickered all around almost simultaneously, indicating the void shields activating at the impact of incoming firepower. In an instant, the void shields surrounding the 4 ships began to show signs of turning purple, signaling an imminent overload. Chapter 218. The proximity firepower of the 11 green-skin ships made it very difficult for Wang Jiarong's fleet to resist. And their counterattack seemed weak and feeble. Charging with their bows facing outward was inherently disadvantageous for firing, let alone when the enemy's weapon systems came online. Their close-range interception abilities were also activated. Whether it was their laser cannons firing or colossal cannon shells, a portion was locked onto midway and intercepted by the enemy's firepower in the void. Of course, the convoy's interception systems were also at work. Defender kinetic rapid-fire cannons and reflector interception laser cannons were doing similar tasks. But overall, they were without a doubt at a disadvantage. Before they could fully extend the distance, they would likely be overwhelmed by the green Skin Orcs' firepower. And a worse point was their speed, it seemed not even as fast as the green skins. At this moment, when the Orc ship's engine systems began to accelerate at full power, despite a late start, they swiftly reached a high speed in a short time. Their lead advantage would likely be nullified before long. Once the speed difference between the two sides was eliminated, the shrinking distance would further enhance the firepower advantage of the green skin fleet. Not to mention, the green skin fleet had a particular preference during naval battles, boarding combat. They could almost be considered, in this universe, the second race that enjoyed boarding combat in naval battles, the first being the starship warriors. Landing pods, landing ships, even short-range warp, these were all means the greenskins could employ. Once the distance became dangerous, they would use these methods. The small landing pods and ships, closing in among a barrage of firepower and equipped with considerable camouflage to deceive the target ship's interception systems, would approach the target ship at low speed, rendering the void shield ineffective and thus allowing them to attach to the ship. Holes in the hull from previous naval battles that seemed trivial could become entry points for invasion. If there was no such entry, the various high-performance bombs and cutting devices that came with the boarding troops would find relatively weak spots on the ship and cut through. These breaches in themselves posed little threat to the ship, akin to an adult being bitten by a mosquito. However, what was terrifying was the venom that came with the bite. A substantial number of warriors would enter the ship through these breaches, engaging in intense combat within the hull. On board the ship, there were no particularly spacious areas suited for deploying heavy firepower. Most of the combat environments were cramped, obstructed, and face-to-face. Who, then, could stand against the green Skin Orcs in such conditions? Elites among the green skin ranks would wreak havoc inside the ship. Even if they couldn't destroy or kill everyone on the starship directly, every casualty they caused would significantly degrade the warship's combat capabilities. If they reached the weapon systems and silenced some of the firepower, that was a win. If they got to the thinker array, they could cripple the ship's automation systems, greatly reducing the ship's departmental coordination. If they reached the engine room, a high-performance bomb detonated from within might paralyze the entire vessel. And if they made it to the captain's quarters? Boarding combat was certainly a high-risk, high-loss action, and in most cases, the landing pods and ships would be destroyed by interception fire before reaching the target. But even a small success could cause disruption, a big success could outright capture the ship. The greenskins weren't afraid of dying. In fact, at this moment, there were already some small drop pods flying over with the cannon shells. However, up until now, no drop pod had managed to break through the interception network, estimating that 100 or 200 greenskin lads had been lost in the Star Sea. Yet, Wang Jiarong's face was still pale. It was good news that the greenskin ground troops had not yet boarded the starship, but this good news was hardly significant. Seeing the void shield had turned a purple hue and witnessing some shells piercing through the void shield, striking the hull of the starship, she could already feel the vibrations. The void shield is a type of energy protection system, characterized by its ability to intercept solid projectiles, energy cannons, and missile weapons, especially high-speed approaching objects and energies. However, it is less effective against low-speed passing objects. A fully operational void shield, that is, when it is blue, offers the best resistance, but when it sustains attacks beyond a certain limit and turns purple, some interceptions may fail, with shells and energy beams having a chance of slipping through. At first, it wasn't so bad. Even if something slipped through, the attacks, weakened by the void shield, upon meeting the solid armor of the starship, would normally be withstood. But when the void shield's capacity reached its limit, turning red, the probability of shells slipping through would increase substantially, and the weakening effect on attacks would diminish, leaving it up to the strength of the armor and the ship's structure to hold out. Although the current state of the void shield was still changing towards purple and the starship's armor was still reliable, the occasional attacks that got through the void shield had not yet caused severe damage. Chapter 219. However, all this was extremely bad news. From the moment the greenskins began their counterattack, the situation rapidly deteriorated. What was more crucial was that Wang Jiarong could not think of any way to change the current state of affairs. Gu Hang, oh Gu Hang! This time you really got me killed. I shouldn't have come to this god-forsaken place. She muttered in her heart, her face drained of color. And just then, the star speaker suddenly reported a message, Captain. We've received a communication signal from the quintet. Wang Jiarong was startled, then burst into joy, connected quickly. The next moment, Yelizayafu Fana's voice filled the entire bridge. "I am Commodore Yelizayafu Fana of the Empire Navy Pegasus Fleet, captain of the quintet." Her clear voice sounded like a savior to everyone aboard the beautiful girl. "Yelizaya! Thank heavens! Finally, we've made contact. Save us quickly." Wang Jiarong was so happy she was nearly crying. "I'm right beside you," Yelizaya said. "Now, you need to get your fleet to turn around and fire full force at those green-skinned ships. We are going to annihilate them here, before they can build up their speed." Wang Jiarong was momentarily stunned. What did she mean by right beside you? Had Yelizaya anticipated encountering the green-skin fleet here and set up an ambush in advance? Was that why there had been no response earlier when the star speaker tried to contact, because the quintet was lying in silent ambush? But why? How had she received the message in advance? Wang Jiarong's mind was a whirl of confusion, but these thoughts only spun around in her head for a short while before she stopped dwelling on them. Following Yelizaya's instructions was the only chance for survival. Immediately, the 4 ships of the beautiful lady convoy began to turn their hulls sideways as Yelizaya had requested, unleashing their full firepower. Without external assistance, this was tantamount to seeking death. Presenting the broadside to the enemy was dangerous. Doing so would enable the full deployment of the ship's firepower, but also presented the largest target area, at a sufficient distance, when firing at each other to decide the course of the battle, when both sides were separated by over 100,000 to 150,000 kilometers, facing the enemy broadside or head-on made little difference in terms of the firepower endured, but the capacity of our own firepower could be at least 30% lower. However, also in a broadside position, the ship obviously couldn't remain motionless. Side-moving ships were easier to dodge cannon fire. Overall, this was a balanced offensive tactic. And at that moment, the charging greenskin fleet was unmistakably employing an aggressive offensive tactic. Shortening the distance, their cannons would greatly increase in power and accuracy, and for this, they were even willing to sacrifice 20–30% of their firepower. But even so, the firepower advantage of the greenskins was still much greater than that of the beautiful lady. They didn't know why these shrimp-like ships all of a sudden adopted a posture as if they were ready for a big battle, but it obviously excited them even more. Their firepower became more ferocious, and they released even more landing capsules. However, at that moment, from some previously dark and empty void, hundreds of missiles suddenly shot out. These missiles were targeted at a greenskin destroyer. And the next moment, 2 giant colossal cannon shells streaked across the void, slamming ruthlessly into its energy shield. The arrival of 2 heavy cannons simultaneously also had a huge destructive power against starships. The energy shield of the targeted greenskin destroyer, which had been a calm blue, suddenly flashed a dangerous purple. Then out of the hundreds of missiles, 70 penetrated the void shield and bombarded the destroyer. The 70 explosions that suddenly erupted on the hull of the destroyer severely damaged the vessel. The energy shield generators might have been impacted by the explosion, as the originally purple void shield vanished momentarily. If they had had a little time, just a few minutes, it would have been enough for the energy generators on the greenskin ships to restart or switch to auxiliary power. However, there was no chance for that. The next 10 slightly smaller colossal cannon shots followed, with 6 hitting their mark and mercilessly pounding the target. The damage inflicted by these 6 shots was even more dreadful than the previous 70 missiles, instantly turning that green-skinned warship into a huge fireball. An expensive destroyer was thus completely destroyed. And the unexpected assault's achievements did not stop there. Another 10 colossal cannon shots were fired at a greenskin escort ship, with 4 making impact, turning its energy shields abruptly red. The strength of the shield generator on the escort ship was much weaker compared to that of the destroyer. On the bridge of Quintet, after the Thinker Array faithfully relayed the battle imagery and confirmed the results, Yelizaya made no exuberant cheers or leaps for joy that would be unsteady and not befitting of a captain. Still, she couldn't help but throw a punch excitedly. The green-skinned warship that had been destroyed could actually be considered the first real combat naval achievement of her captaincy. And this feat alone was enough to surpass the accomplishments of many captains from the Tianma Star Sector. Since the establishment of the Tianma Sector Fleet, there haven't been many instances of it being used as a support unit by the Imperial Navy, deployed to form larger fleets for combat operations. Besides those veterans who formed temporary united fleets, the younger and less experienced ones mostly stayed within the boundaries of the Star Sector, at most eradicating interstellar pirates in the surrounding star sectors. What capabilities could those interstellar pirates possibly have? At best, they might have an escort ship level pirate ship, which would be quite decent, and many would just use an ordinary spaceship to perform robberies, daring to attack only ultra-small convoys. In the past, Yelazia never even managed to achieve the feat of eradicating petty pirates, which was one of the reasons she was ridiculed behind her back. But from now on, no one would dare to laugh at her again. Even those seasoned captains who've been assigned to other high-intensity combat zones and witnessed larger battles don't all have a record of destroying an enemy destroyer. Getting an assist would be considered brag-worthy for many years to come. And today, she, the Commodore who was often derided as having connections in a rapidly promoted rank, had accomplished it. Not only was it not an assist, but she had also been an exclusive main force. What about an ambush from ambush? That's called tactics. However, after the initial excitement, Yelazia immediately returned to her calm demeanor. One of the enemy's 3 destroyers had been destroyed, which certainly counted as a heavy blow to the Greenskin fleet, but they had plenty of ships and ample resources left. The battle was far from over. Especially now that the advantage of a surprise attack was gone, without the element of surprise, the next barrage of firepower would not so easily achieve the same results as before. The Orc fleet had already discovered their whereabouts and would not allow them to strike unabated. Advanced ship maneuvers would ensure more shells missed their targets, close-range anti-air firepower on high alert would intercept some of the colossal cannon shots or deflect them. Of course, as a main cruiser, Quintet had ample weaponry, particularly the 2L-scale Wrath of Loyalty colossal cannons, which wielded destructive power against ships of the escort level. Just one hit and those escort ships' energy shields would immediately overload. On Quintet, slave workers and technicians were now working at breakneck speeds to load cannon shells for the next round of gunfire. The Thinker array was striving to observe and lock onto targets that were actually moving rapidly. The firing attack needed preparation time. Before it was ready, Quintet would have to withstand a round of enemy fire. The Defender rapid-fire cannons and reflector interception lasers started operating to counter the Orc ship's firepower, and at the same time, vast expanses of blue light emanated from around the cruiser. That was the site of the void shield activating when the ship was under attack. The naval battle had thus entered an intensely heated phase. At this point, the previous achievements of destroying a destroyer and overloading an escort ship's energy shield no longer seemed as important. At that moment, Yelazia couldn't help but turn and look at the man standing not far behind her on her side. She sighed and said, "Gu Hang, if we lose, you'll truly have let me down." Gu Hang smiled and replied, "If we win, this will be the starting point of your glorious path." Chapter 220. Hearing the so-called starting point of the path of glory, Yelazia snorted coldly, looking disdainful and not wanting to bother with Gu Hang. She turned her head and continued to busy herself. She kept issuing orders, constantly listening to the reports from various departments, responding and making judgments accordingly, forming commands that were relayed downwards. She seemed somewhat nervous, struggling to remain focused. Indeed, she was not an experienced veteran of the Navy, nor had she had proper combat experience, but her outstanding academic record at the Naval Academy was not faked. If her grades hadn't truly been excellent, how could she have become a captain, especially when the Fufana family had more than just her in its younger generation? In her mind were all the tactical maneuvers she had learned at the Naval Academy, which she now combined with the real-time situation on the battlefield, responding in a standard manner and issuing orders. This might appear somewhat rigid, but it was less likely to result in errors. During her school days, Yelazia had come up with many bizarre naval tactics, but after gaining practical experience, she found her early whims were purely self-indulgent. Only a few solid and seemingly effective strategies appeared viable under the current circumstances. But she dared not use them. Who knew if untested methods would turn out to be ingenious or give away an advantage? The most important thing for her to do under the current situation was to avoid making mistakes, relying on the strong firepower and defensive capabilities of the Quintet cruiser to fight steadily. She would rather fight in a more rigid manner. Gu Hang watched Yelazia's serious expression and a smile appeared on his face, his mood relaxed slightly. How to later ease the tension with this female commodore was a matter for later, for now, they had to get through the current difficult situation. A conflict had almost erupted between the two just a moment ago. After Gu Hang boarded the starship with nearly 20,000 warriors, the Quintet reached the jump point of Tunnel 1 in the Rage Owl star system. Before this, Yelazia had attempted to have the star speaker on the starship send a message to a beautiful girl to warn Wang Jiarong to prepare in advance. However, the message failed to send, likely because the other party was traversing the star realm tunnel. In such a state, it is difficult for a star speaker to locate the target of the message and transmit it. Thereafter, they gave up on sending messages and let the ships quietly stop in the void. Muting all communication signals, other than the necessary energy supply, they turned off most of the Engine's power. The starship floated silently in the void, indistinguishable from a speck of dust on the scale of tens to hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Even if the enemy began scanning the surroundings immediately after emerging from the Star Realm tunnel, it would be very hard to detect them. Yelizaya was strictly implementing her previous idea. She was crouching here, waiting for events to unfold. If they could fight, they would fight, if not, they would flee. And after seeing the Greenskin fleet chasing after the beautiful lady convoy, Yelizaya found herself in a bit of a difficult position. Those escort ships can be set aside for the moment, as their small caliber weapons would find it tough to penetrate the defense systems of a main cruiser. But those 4 destroyers couldn't be ignored. The medium caliber firepower they carried could indeed pose a real threat. Yet, when it came down to it, it wasn't like there was no chance of victory. The beautiful lady convoy still had 4 ships, and with their help, the chance of victory was there, even quite substantial 60 or even 70%. However, a 60 to 70% chance of victory was not enough for Yelizaya to take a gamble. Betting and losing everything was not worth it when compared to retreating now, gathering reinforcements, and easily eliminating the Greenskins with the entire Tianma fleet assembled. What about the safety of Rage Owl Star? Forget it, a planet with an annual tax quota of 5 million wasn't worth saving. The cost of building one escort ship, even the cheapest ones, starts at $500 million. Rage Owl Star would have to pay taxes for 100 years to afford just one escort ship. But for Gu Heng, the concept was completely different. If Yelizaya withdrew, Rage Owl Star would be doomed. He strongly urged Yelizaya to engage in the battle. The conflict between the two arose just like that. Yelizaya was not keen on it, and during the argument, Gu Heng didn't state it explicitly, but he implied that he had 20,000 warriors on the starship. Yelizaya's face turned dark. Even if it wasn't stated openly, it was a threat. She had wanted Gu Heng to bring his troops on board as a precaution. The Greenskins favored boarding tactics in space naval battles, which was written in the naval military doctrine. Although there were already marine troops on the starship, having an additional 20,000 warriors would certainly make her feel more secure. Yet who would have expected that at this time, it would become a tool for Gu Heng to threaten her with? If an internal riot broke out on the starship, regardless of whether her marine troops could suppress Gu Heng's 20,000 warriors, there was no doubt it would result in a lengthy fight. An internal strife on the ship would pose a fatal threat to the safety of the quintet. Gu Heng could see that Yelizaya was cornered. He didn't continue to push the issue with a hard stance. A Pyrrhic victory would be a cause for the rivaling Greenskins to rejoice. Subsequently, he softened his tone, talking about defending the Empire, protecting the convoy, eliminating the alien threat, and painted a picture of how if they really managed to annihilate this Greenskin fleet, Yelizaya would, beyond doubt, have made a significant achievement.